Hey guys. This is part 6 of What If Naruto Went Back in Time but Ended Up in the Wrong Timeline. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 54. Where Konoha had a stadium of thick, hewn walls, and bleachers surrounding a fighting arena, and IWA literally had an open field with stands built days before the exam, Kumogakure had a mix of the two. The audience seats were literally carved onto the side of a mountain, overlooking a field of what was once farmland, but now, after so many years of tournaments and exams, was a flat beaten stretch of dirt and grass. The stadium was already starting to fill up, civilians and off-duty shinobi coming to spectate the grand show. Hyuga Hinata's eyes panned over the whole place, finding familiar and unfamiliar faces alike as she searched the crowd for She brought her hand up, finding Shino's Kikeichu resting along her knuckles. She smiled, watching as the bug turned and looked straight ahead. She followed it. Before long, she was sitting in the designated seats assigned to the genin that had participated or were going to participate in the exam, finding her two teammates already there. Akamaru barked, a happy little sound as he wagged his tail and ran towards her. She reached down and picked him up, smiling as she scratched the pup under his chin. Hey Hinata! Kiba smirked at her where he sat, arms wide and resting on the seats beside him with his feet propped up on the seat in front of him. She rolled her eyes, stepping forward and smacking his feet off their perch. "Ow!" he complained before she gave him a look, a lone eyebrow hiking itself high, almost daring him to complain about her not letting him put his feet up. The Inuzuka grumbled, rolling his eyes. Yeah. Satisfied that he was well and properly chastised, she looked around the room, finding more of the genin hopefuls from other villages and wondering where the others from their own village were. Not here yet. Apparently, her face spoke for her, or Shino had just gotten that good at reading her tells by now. She shrugged. Oh well. They'd get here when they got here. Taking a seat next to Kiba and in front of Shino, she set Akamaru down on her lap and continued to scratch the dog's head, feeling his tail thumping against her thigh. Then, after a few minutes, someone walked up to her right, a rather tall someone. Hinata turned, looking to the tall, dark-haired woman she recognized as Uchiha Itachi, Sasuke's sister. Black eyes looked down and regarded her. Team 9, right? She nodded, and without any further explanation or preamble, the woman sat down beside her. Hinata blinked, staring in a sort of stupefaction and looking to her teammates, whom seemed just as lost as she was. Feeling the need to help, Hinata tentatively reached with her hand, poking at the Uchiha woman's shoulder. With a swivel of those black eyes, Hinata felt like a small, uppity mouse being examined by a very intimidating hawk. Yes? Her hand signs were quick and to the point. Itachi nodded. Yes. I'm aware that this place is for the genin undergoing the exam and their teachers. Hinata blinked, and blinked again. She decided to just stay in her seat, and not ask any more questions. She clearly knew what she was doing here, even if Hinata herself had no clue. Minutes later, there was a pink-haired blur that Hinata had to do a bit of a double take to fully recognize. She felt her head tilt just a little bit. Sakura's usually pale complexion was considerably more tanned. Wherever she'd been training, it had apparently been under the sun. She was dressed in something Hinata hadn't seen her in before as well, tight-fitting clothing, with a bandolier full of pouches going from her right shoulder to her left hip, kunai holsters strapped to her right shin with an arm guard with a single blade at her wrist on her left forearm. Her hair was also longer, considerably longer. She hadn't seen her friend in a solid month because, well, they were kind of competing against each other, and training together was kind of a bad idea to say the least, but this was a little absurd. She had to wonder what exactly she'd bloody well gone and missed. Sakura was panting, looking as though she'd sprinted to the stadium. She looked up and glared at the dark-haired woman. Why the hell did you turn off our alarm? She received a smirk in reply. If you really needed an alarm to wake up for your Chunin exam, you don't deserve to pass. The pinkette looked like she was oh so tempted to throttle her. She huffed, seemingly expelling her anger and frustration in the single exhale before turning to look at her with a smile. Hey Hinata! Hinata smiled back, freeing her hands from petting Akamaru to reply back. Sasuke's on his way, she said before she squeezed herself between Hinata and the Uchiha. Not sure where Akane is, but Naruto-kun promised they'd both be here, so she'll probably be around soon. How've you been? Okay, she answered shortly, a twinkle in her eye. But how about you? Seems like you had a hell of a month. Sakura winked. Oh, you'll see what kind of month it's been soon. Hinata smiled back, taking the hint for what it was and changing the topic to more mundane subjects that didn't have to do with their training. Soon enough, just as the stage was starting to fill up with its spectators, Sasuke arrived. Though the changes weren't as drastic as Sakura's, Sasuke did look slightly more tanned and had also gotten a bit of an update to his wardrobe, though, again, nothing quite so drastic. Added to his usual clothes of dark blue and beige, Sasuke was now wearing proper shin and arm guards. Expensive. But then again, Sasuke's family, like hers, could probably afford it. Hey! Was his simple greeting, lone hand rising in a half-hearted wave before he took his own seat at the other side of his sister. Ready for Hinata to kick your ass, Uchiha? Kiba egged on from beside her. She rolled her eyes a little bit, but smiled. The fact that he had that much confidence in her ability to beat Sasuke was flattering. She has a better shot than you ever will, Sasuke called back. Oh ho ho! Sakura egged on, smirking over Hinata's head towards Kiba. I felt that sting, Inuzuka. Shut up, Pinky. Just because you changed your outfit and sunbathed doesn't mean a damn thing. Sakura smirked, the scar over her eye, barely covered by her hair, twisting in a way that, at the very least, looked painful as the two began trading insults over her head. Hinata sat there and continued to pet Akamaru, quiet as ever. Marching up to the VIP box, Tsunade tried not to give any outward signs of how tired she actually was. While Kumo was hospitable enough, to a ninja of her caliber she could always tell when she was being watched, and there were a lot of people, doing a lot of watching, all the time. Needless to say, sleep, these last few weeks, hadn't exactly been coming easy. Fine instincts honed to a dangerous edge with at least 2 decades of experience would have her snap awake at the slightest sound that registered in her mind as abnormal, to sense it didn't recognize, and smells that were unfamiliar. And while she could function well enough with little sleep, the toll was starting to grate, to say the very least. She made it to the door, nodding and greeting to the Umbu guard she could see with her eyes, and marching in. Sarutobi was already there, so was Magajiro Kutu, the Reikage, the Kazekage and the Mizukage, Mei. Her sensei turns to look at her out of the corner of his eye. Tsunade. Sensei. She greets just as curtly. She sees his eyes dart to the door, then back to her in a silent question. Where is Orochimaru? Tsunade tries, and probably fails to smother her smile. XXXXX. She'd gone to his suite to look for him, as was their routine. She did tend to wake up a bit earlier thanks to her work in the hospital. Everything had gone pretty much normal. He'd made coffee, she drank some. He'd seemed a little shifty, now that she thought about it at the time. Eyes darting this way and that way as if searching for something, but she just figured he was being a bit more paranoid than she was and left it at that. They were about ready to leave when out of the blue, the doorbell rang. Now, she'd been standing next to the thing, and before she could fully register her teammate's frantic call of no, she'd gone and opened it, heart jumping into her throat with the fear that she'd set off some kind of trap that was about to kill them both. But there'd just been a woman, dark-skinned, white hair and dreads, muscled and nearly a head taller than Tsunade herself, carrying 8 swords, standing on the other side, a predatory hungry gleam in her eyes. Why hello there, sexy. She actually seemed to purr. Before Tsunade could gather what exactly was going on, Orochimaru had slammed the door in her face, back pressing into the wood to hold it in place. He looked to her like there was a full-fledged demon on the other side. Lock all the doors! He hissed, yellow eyes narrowing dangerously. Wa dash, I say idealo ckllt chidiors. And right then from the other side of the barrier she can hear the scratch of fingernails slowly gliding down the wood as the woman called to them. Oh, don't be like that, darling dash. The shudder her teammate released is something Tsunade would treasure till her dying day. XXXXXX. She tries not to laugh as she marches over to the 2 men. Sarutobi eyes her curiously while Kutu tosses the man a questioning look of his own, both being far too tactful to just blurt out the question in present company. They let her keep her silence. If she was laughing, it must not have been that big of a deal. She stands slightly behind the 2 leaders of her country, a glorified guard. Even so, the smile stays on her lips for a time, but it dies a quick death when the last of the leaders enter the room. The tension grows immediately, all levity and ease seemingly sucked right out of the space as the Tsuchikage and his daimyo march in. Greetings. The words are crisp, almost cold but not quite. Both men march across the room, 2 Umbu guard at their backs as they take their seats, not even looking in their direction as they begin to exchange the usual pleasantries with the other heads of state. Suddenly, she wished Orochimaru actually was here. Inevitably, the stands filled, and before too long the Chunin proctors made their way to where the Genin teams were sitting. Sakura watched as the man called the names of the contestants. The entirety of the Suna team of course was called, as was she, Sasuke, Hinata and Mato Gai's team, 2 members of the Kumogakure they'd fought against, 2 members of the Kirigakure team they'd met when Naruto invited that Haku girl to join them for lunch that first day, and an entire Kumo team the proctor just called as B's Kids, and 2 of their teammates from the Kusa team that had been with them for the first part of the exam. 18 Chunin hopefuls. Hinata exchanged goodbyes with her teammates, placing Akamaru back on Kiba's head before marching away while Sakura spied Gai-sensei openly crying, falling to his knees as he hugged Lee and Tenten. Lee hugged and cried too while Tenten tried to squirm away. It was all very dramatic really. She kept looking around. "Don't worry," came Itachi's calm reassurance, never even bringing her eyes up from whatever spot she was staring at in the arena floor. "They'll be here." Sakura pouted a bit, annoyed that she was so easy to read, but she hoped the older girl was right regardless. They negotiated their way through the general crowd, making their way into the building/mountain hall, further down into the stone before they arrived at yet another waiting area. There were Chunin there already of course, with one of them holding a cardboard box. "When your name is called, reach into the box, pull out a slip, show it to the proctor," the man said, looking onto a clipboard. "Yukigo Omo." It was a Kumo nin that stepped forward, dark-skinned, white hair, with 2 short swords on his back. Pulling out a piece of paper from the box, he showed it to the Chunin. 9. The man called as another wrote something else on his own clipboard. One by one he called out more names. Hinata was 3, Tenten was 12, Lee was 5, the puppeteer from Suna was number 1. Finally, he called Sasuke's name. Sasuke stepped up, reaching in, and the proctor was soon calling out to the other. 10. "Looks like I know who I'm fighting," he muttered. If he was 10 then he was fighting 9. 9 had been. She turned her eyes, finding the dark-skinned Kumo nin that had first been called. She saw Sasuke offer the guy a nod and he nodded right back, adding something of a halfway mocking salute with 2 fingers. He marched back to her. "Any thoughts?" she half-whispered. "Swords, so close range," he said. "If he's got lightning we share an element, so that really won't give either of us an advantage, though I've got fire too which he might have a problem with. All in all, hope I'm faster, stay out of his reach and try to win the fight at range." She nodded, a solid plan given that he'd never seen the guy fight. Even if he was wrong, Sasuke was the best on the fly strategist they had in the team. She knew she couldn't react nearly as fast as he did, and Akane kinda bludgeoned her way through the problem with a fire affinity that could literally take down a building. If Naruto had been training her in use of that super strength they'd discovered a month or so ago, then she imagined that habit wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. She waited anxiously as the names were called out. The Suna girl was set up to fight Lee, the red-headed Kumo Kunoichi was set to fight Tenten, Niji one of the Kiri ninja from that Haku girl's team, and Hinata drew against the Suna team member Naruto had told them to stay away from. Gaara finally, her name was called. She felt the butterflies in her stomach, the flutter of nervousness growing a bit more with every step. Finally, she reached forward and took the paper. Number 2. She showed it to the proctor, but she didn't even need to think about who her opponent was, turning a sharp green eye to the smirking Kankuro. Oh, she was going to enjoy this. As she stepped back and the proctor finished calling the last names, squaring off the full roster of genin that were going to compete, he set the box down. "All right. Everyone wait until it's your turn to fight. This waiting room is yours to do with as you will. If you prefer to watch the fights and spectate, there is a viewing room past that door." He pointed over to the left to a nondescript wooden door. "Sabaku, Haruno, you're the first ones up, so follow me please." She felt Sasuke's hand on her shoulder, turning to look at her teammate who smirked at her. "I tell you to kick his ass, but I should probably say go easy on him judging by that look in your eye." She chuckled. "Not a chance," he snorted, moving past her as Hinata and Tenten also came by to wish her good luck. Lee also offered his own dramatic well wishes. She thanked him and hoped she wasn't too obvious in how quickly she ran away. She followed the proctor with Kankuro, up a ramp that led to a doorway that yawned right into the side of the arena. She could hear the crowds above her head, 1,000 voices and footsteps. The Chunin didn't pause, there was little ceremony to it as he stepped out to the fighting grounds with them trailing behind them. As soon as the crowd saw them, a cheer went up, and Sakura felt those butterflies all over again, and she wondered if she should try to ignore them or wave before settling on some admittedly timid waves with a smile in their general direction. She looked towards Itachi. She was still where she left her, but Naruto and Akane weren't. She tried not to feel bad about that. She failed miserably. Still, she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and proceeded to keep following the Chunin to the center of the arena. And then, "Wait!" The shout was loud enough for her to hear it, ever so faintly over the crowd, and Sakura suddenly wished, very much in contrast to her previous feelings, that the owner of the voice would not do exactly what she knew he was about to do. And sure enough, shooting out of the open side of the arena like a bullet came Naruto himself, a little blonde blur with a splash of red. Akane was on his back, and both looked like they'd just gone running through a forest, which was likely. Akane had twigs and leaves in her hair, so did Naruto, both looking scruffy and worse for wear. The blonde beamed a megawatt bright smile as Sakura tried not to bury her face in her hands in embarrassment. "We didn't miss your fight, right, Sakura-chan?" he asked, oblivious to, or ignoring, her utter mortification. She shook her head. "Sir, this area is for Chunin hopefuls and proctors only. Sorry." Naruto laughed, moving towards the wall. "Just had to get here on time." "Good luck, Sakura-chan." Akane waved from her place on Naruto's back, gripping him like an oversized red limpet as the blonde, pleased as can be, marched his sunshine bright ass up the side of the arena wall and made a beeline for Itachi. If the earth could have risen up and swallowed her whole, she would die a happy person right now. Chapter 55. The sun beat down over her head, bright and hot. It felt like a warm balm and a burning brand all at once. Her fingers tingled as the anticipation rolled up and down her spine. Nervousness and giddiness warring in her mind. Kankuro stood across from her, looking smug and sure of himself. She promised right then that she'd wipe that smirk right off his face. "The fight is called when one combatant surrenders, or is unable to continue fighting," the proctor said, looking to the two of them. "Am I understood?" "Got it. I understand," they answered, never tearing their eyes from one another. The proctor gave a single sharp nod before he held out his hand and cut it straight down with a bark. "Begin!" Her body snapped into a fighting stance, caught just the faintest bit off guard by the abrupt start. The bandages on Kankuro's back came unfurled and the spider-like puppet skittered out, crawling towards her on the ground. She skirted back, feet ghosting over the dirt as her fingers fished out a fistful of smoke bombs. Tossing them, she slipped into the thick gray cloud, watching through the haze as the puppet lunged after her. She could see the blades on it, serrated and smooth in equal measure. The thing followed her with unerring precision. Just as she thought, Kankuro had some means of detecting her in the smoke. Time to play that up. Kankuro felt the confidence building in his gut. It wasn't the first time someone had thought to use smoke bombs on him. It was one of the first things he'd learned to counter with an array of chakra sensors beneath the wooden flesh of his puppet that let him feel where the enemy was. She moved left and he followed her. She jumped and the puppet was right there. All she could do was uselessly slap at his puppet to push herself away and get some distance, hands shoving her as she tried to stay clear of Kurasa's blades. That was either lucky or smart of her, because the blades were poisoned too. The cat and mouse game continued for several seconds and Kankuro wondered when she would slip up. Then she finally did. She leapt out of the smoke, and she must have gotten herself turned around in the gray haze, or just plain old desperate because her back was turned to him. The puppeteer drew a kunai without hesitation, rushing forward and reaching out with his free hand to grab the girl's long mass of pink hair. His gloved hand grasped onto it, twisting the strands in his grip and fisting them harshly as he yanked her back onto her tiptoes and pressed the knife to the side of her throat. "Give it up, Pinky!" He expected fear, or hell, even anger. He knew something was very wrong when all he saw was a cold smirk, scarred green eye glinting as she peered up at his own. The next thing anyone in the stadium, or even the proctor saw, was Kankuro howling in pain as his whole arm seemed to split open, cut to ribbons and gore. The Sabaku tried to choke down his screams, swallowing pain-filled sobs and shouts of rage in equal measure before looking at the girl. He could see it now. They caught the blood more distinctly than her hair, refracting against the pale sunlight with the ruby red razor wire. "Itachi-sensei always did tell me they would go for the hair." Sakura smiled, one hand on her hip as the other twirled a kunai knife, the razor wire threads dancing like serpents for a split second before they were lost again in the pink mane that reached down to her lower back. Looks like she was right. You won't be moving that arm again for quite a while, I'm guessing. You bitch! His still functional hand reached out, grasping Kurasa with chakra strings. The puppet sprang back to life, rushing towards the girl. Ah! Sakura held up a single finger, making Kankuro freeze at that smug smile on her face. You can definitely throw your little toy at me, but you've got two problems. Firstly, unless I messed up in my biology class, you've got about 95 seconds left to live. He looked down at his arm. The appendage was bleeding profusely, and now that he cared to notice, one of the slices had cut high enough to threaten the artery along his inner bicep. Had she cut it? Also, puppeteers don't have a monopoly on poison. She plucked out a small vial from her bandolier, smirking. I'd hardly give it to an enemy, but a surrendering non-combatant, maybe. Never, in his entire life, had Kankuro felt so utterly humiliated as he did right now, staring into the smug face of Haruno Sakura. He took one step forward, feeling his whole world spin and wobble, the lightheadedness assaulting him almost instantly along with the feeling of nausea. She cut it all right. 72 seconds. She shook the bottle between her fingers. Your choice. My offer does have an expiration date. He swallowed, rage and insulted pride warring with reason and sense. He felt like he was choking, and in that moment he swore one day he would get payback for such a humiliating defeat. He hadn't even lasted a full minute. I surrender. She tossed him the antidote, and even the minor act of catching it made him feel like he was going to heave his guts all over the stadium floor as he heard the Chunin medics approaching behind him. By explicit surrender, Haruno Sakura is the winner of this battle. Risky. Using yourself as bait for the trap. A grouse tree trunk, arms crossed as he stared down to the stadium, a frown on his face. Bold. Kuto answered the rakage. It looked calculated enough to me. May decided to give her 2 cents, one leg crossed over the other, hands on her lap. She was never surprised by the attack, seemed ready to dodge if he'd done something different, and played him like a musical instrument. Too early to say for sure, but I'm betting we're looking at a potential Chunin here. The Kazekage huffed a breath. Kankuro was sloppy. It's more a testament to his failure than her success. Come now, you're too hard on the boy. Kuto reassured. How many of us would have expected a trap in that hair? You have clearly never been married to a kunoichi. Sarutobi half laughed, half coughed past his pipe. The crowd erupted in cheers and Sakura felt a palpable relief, a euphoria rushing through her body, building up from a giddiness in her gut as she bunched herself up and let out a cheer, one fist pumping into the air as she jumped straight up. Looking up at the crowd, she found 1,000 cheering faces, finding Itachi, Naruto and Akane in the crowds. Though the latter two were hard to miss as both were doing a rather remarkable job of holding up a rather massive sign that said, Sakura No. 1, in bright pink letters. Where exactly they'd gotten the sign from, she did not know. And were those clones tying the top of the sign to the ceiling? She decided to beat a quick path to the exit before her sensei did anything else to embarrass her. As soon as she made it to where the other hopefuls were and was immediately greeted by a rather enthusiastic set of cheers and hugs by Tenten and Hinata respectively. Holy shit! You go, girl! Tenten laughed. Remind me to lend you some of my shampoo later. Sakura grimaced a bit. The sickly sticky feeling of someone's blood over her scalp was less than pleasant, to be honest, and the small droplets dripping onto the back of her calves wasn't exactly helping. Thanks, she said, and meant it more than Tenten probably realized. Hinata's hands flew off into a question. If he'd have thrown the kunai, I would have dodged and gone with Plan B. What was Plan B? Tenten asked. Sakura winked, holding up a single finger and pressing it to her lips. Might have to use that one on you, Tenten. Oh ho ho. The weapon mistress seemed to shiver in what very well might be anticipation. I like this new you. They made their way to the spectator's box, and Sakura just managed to catch the tail end of Lee's promise about something, or he'd run through all of Kumo with nothing but one hand before she turned him out. Sasuke smiled at her over his shoulder. You enjoyed that too much for me to say nice work. You'd have done worse. You're supposed to be above such things, though. Lies and slander. She smirked, marching up beside him. Good work. The voice caught her off guard. Sakura was doubly surprised to turn and find none other than the blindfolded Sabaka no Gara to be the one that spoke. Thank you? The redhead shrugged. I've been warning these two for years that they have to stop underestimating their enemies. Hey, I'm not nearly as blind as Kuro. Temari protested beside him. You're not blind as often, Gaara corrected with a smirk, tilting his head a bit in her direction. But when you think you've got this, you might as well get a flash bang in the face before you realize there's a problem with your approach. She scoffed. Please! A proctor entered. Rock Lee! He called. Sabaka no Temari. Don't get cocky now. Gaara poked. The blonde Sunanin looked at her brother, annoyed before grabbing her fan from where it rested by the wall. Sakura watched her go, turning and wishing Lee all the luck she could along with the others from Konoha before she turned her attention out the windows of the spectator's box. Naruto smiled as he eyed Itachi beside him. How long have you been dying to show off that razor wire trick? Itachi twirled a lock of hair in her finger. The midnight tresses were longer even than Sakura's, reaching nearly to her hips when she was fully standing. I believe it was Sakura that showed off. That was totally you by proxy. I don't know what you're talking about. The twitch at the corner of her mouth said otherwise, as did the glint of something twining around that finger she was still using to play with her hair. He smirked. You ruined the surprise for me, though. You already knew about it. She countered. You also know I have many more surprises. Could you two go flirt somewhere else? Kiba growled beside the two, glaring at Naruto. Seriously, man, just because you've got a hot girlfriend doesn't mean you have to brag about it. Leave Naruto-sensei alone. Akane demanded, stomping once on Kiba's foot. The Inuzuka screamed, growling at the Jinchuriki, who was more than willing to square up with the boy twice her size. Naruto blushed, opening his mouth to protest. As she's not shy all of a sudden, Uzumaki? Itachi's voice was like sweet, sweet poison as she enjoyed his embarrassment. He glared. You're a veal. You've told me such in a different life. I hate you, he declared before turning his gaze from her towards the stadium. Lee and Temari had taken their stances on the field by now, with both Chunin hopefuls squaring off. What do you think? Sakura asked. Sasuke took a breath. Lee relies on taijutsu from what Itachi told us, and fan users are typically mid to long-range wind users. It's honestly just a question of whether Lee can get close enough, really. Just as he finished his assessment, Lee seemed to have lost his patience, rushing straight forward in a deadhead charge as Temari whipped her fan free and swung, a gust of wind hitting the green Genin head-on and stopping his movement. He tried to rush again only for Temari to send another wind blast, and Sasuke could spy the tiny cuts now appearing over Lee's body, small like paper cuts, but if she continued, she leapt into the air, holding onto her fan as she used it as a platform to shoot herself into the sky and land far enough away that Lee's progress in closing the distance was deleted in an instant. I'm calling it now for her, Sasuke said, stepping back and towards a bench. I've seen enough. Oh, come on, Sakura complained. It's the opening exchange, and unless Lee gets a serious speed boost, he's not going dash. Asterisk thud asterisk asterisk thud asterisk. Anyway dash. Sasuke's words rather quickly died in his throat as he turned his head at the curious sound. The two orange leg warmers Lee always wore were now off. This time when Lee moved, Temari didn't even have time to swing the fan, and it was probably more reflex than actual thought that got her moving in time to avoid getting in range of Lee's taijutsu. Slowly, Sasuke stepped back to his place beside Sakura, who was looking decidedly too pleased with herself. All right, he said slowly. I take it back. It was too early to call, he admitted, ignoring the fact that there'd be no tolerating her for the next hour or two. The fight lasted a long time, far longer than Sakura's. While Temari could stay out of Lee's reach using her fans gliding, wind jutsu, and even standing on the stadium walls, her attacks could barely even scratch Lee. He was just too fast, literally faster than the wind, and any attack that did hit him didn't seem to really slow him down at all, with nothing but a handful of minor cuts to show the damage he'd received. In the end, it was a battle of attrition more than anything else. As Temari realized her situation, she employed more and more powerful wind jutsu. Wider in scope, and greater in effect, trying to hit the Konoha Genin with a single powerful strike so her wind jutsu could really cut him. But Lee's speed was practically inhuman. And the more wind jutsu she used, the faster she got tired. Perhaps, if she would have conserved her energy, used smaller, more numerous attacks to force Lee to keep spending energy and speed to dodge, rather than single bursts of slow, big attacks, she may have outlasted him that way. But that didn't happen. And all Lee needed was one slip. He got it with a stumble. All it was a single stumble from legs whose muscles burned and whose bones felt like wet cardboard. The most minute of delays in her jump to escape, then Lee was on top of her. He caught her on the wall, grasping onto her ankle a split second before she escaped again, and throwing her with one arm down to the ground below to pounce. Temari's kunai were out in an instant, abandoning her unwieldy, massive fan to attack in hand-to-hand, and to be fair, she did a hell of a lot better than Sasuke thought she would do, though also, Lee was limiting himself to try and disarm her and get her to yield rather than utilizing what brutal punching power he must have had. He grappled with the girl, systematically disarming her when she drew a weapon and blocking the dangerous strikes she tried to sneak through his guard towards his throat, eyes, armpit, and ankle. She knew where to hit, but it was clear Lee, when it came to taijutsu, was practically on a different planet, rather than a different league. Finally, after nearly 15 minutes of non-stop fighting, Temari collapsed onto her back, her breathing ragged as Lee, unbelievably, fussed over her and begged her to let him call the medics over. Sasuke was half worried Lee would surrender just so the Chunin medics could finally help the exhausted girl. "Lee's such a sweetheart," Sakura giggled. "And if you tell him I said that I will kill you in your sleep," she promised. He could tell the difference. "I don't need more him to keep hounding me for a date." Sasuke held up his hands like a man stepping back from a bonfire. Not his business. He watched the green-clad genin carry his opponent to the medics, and he could have sworn he heard the cry of use somewhere before the another proctor stepped into the viewing box. "Yukigo Oma, Uchiha Sasuke." The raven-haired youth took a breath, eyeing his opponent at the other side of the room. "Good luck," Sakura said. "I'm too good for luck," he joked. "Ass, you could swear he was your brother and not mine." "Oh hush," Naruto said, looking through his many pouches. "Help me find the scroll where I stored his sign." The Uchiha rolled her eyes upwards where several clones were rolling up Sakura's sign to hide it for Sasuke's match. "I don't think I'll be doing that." Sasuke stepped out towards the field, trying not to wince at the brightness of the sun. His opponent, Omo, was sucking on a lollipop, seeming remarkably at ease with the whole thing. Sasuke wasn't sure if that spoke to well-earned confidence or stupid arrogance. He hoped it was the latter. They stood in the middle of the arena. Sasuke could see the bits of blood still on the ground, Kankuro's more prominently than Lee or Temari's. "The fight is called when one combatant surrenders, or is unable to continue fighting. Am I understood?" He nodded, so did Omo. The man cut his hand across the air between them. "Begin!" Sasuke didn't take a stance, not immediately, either did Omo. The dark-skinned Kumo-nin popped the lollipop out of his mouth. "If I ask you to give up, would you?" Sasuke raised an eyebrow. "Don't see why I would." His opponent sighed. "Figures." Spitting out the piece of candy, he reached to the blades on his back, drawing them. That's when Sasuke took his stance. Omo's foot shifted, and Sasuke moved with him, both of them reading each other's stances, measuring their certainty and reactions. Sasuke had never faced a kenjutsu user, but the principles were the same for kunai knife fighting. Avoid the weapons where possible, disarm at first opportunity. Oftentimes when using a knife or a sword, people forgot all the other weapons the body had. Elbows, knees, even the skull. When Omo attacked, Sasuke backpedaled out of the reach of the first swing, ducking beneath the second as he tried for a kick at the exposed ribs, only for Omo's elbow to come snapping down right into the cleft between his foot and shin. He cursed, leg now throbbing as he snapped it back down, gingerly retreating to gain some distance. Then there was a wall at his back. He crashed into it, hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs, and Sasuke only had a moment to realize Omo had somehow made this wall without hand seals before his opponent was on top of him. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade, and then lunged forward before the second strike could come, pressing his torso against the edge of the sword before momentum and power could be put in the swing, elbows rushing forward to catch Omo full in the teeth. The sharp, searing pain that lanced up his gut told him well enough his reward for the effort as he disengaged, leaping up, above and behind Omo's earth wall. It collapsed a split second later, crumbling to dust as Omo spat out a wad of blood, nose also bleeding rather profusely. He spotted Sasuke on the other side, with the Uchiha cradling his fresh stomach wound with a faintly green glowing hand. Omo groaned, his arms falling to his sides in what seemed like a man that had just run a marathon only to find out he had to climb a tower. "For fuck's sake, med techniques? Really?" Sasuke shrugged. "I want to be a medic," he answered somewhat defensively. That's nice and all, but did you have to learn it for this exam? Now beating you is gonna be twice as hard. I'm sorry? I guess? He genuinely did not know what the Kumo-nin expected. Mind healing this busted nose then? Sasuke blinked. We're competing. Why would I heal you? This had to be the most bizarre conversation he'd ever had with an enemy. Omo let out another aggravated huff. Alright, it's fine. It doesn't bother me, it bothers me. It bothers me a lot. Now when I win I'm gonna look ugly doing it with a goddamn nosebleed. You're not winning, Sasuke answered. Shush. He snapped back into his stance and attacked. Wherever his head was when he was talking, Sasuke had to admit that Omoi had a mind for close-range combat. Sasuke himself was no slouch in the taijutsu arts, and his speed was nothing to scoff at, but almost seemed more than his match, and as the fight wore on he realized that the Kumo-nin was picking up speed to slowly but surely overwhelm him. He wants to save his real ability for later in the tournament. That was all well and good. In truth, Sasuke was holding back a few tricks of his own. But he hardly wanted to exhaust himself here, or have Omo keep pulling out more and more tricks to match his own in a slow escalation. Better end it now. Hit him hard, hit him fast, and make sure he doesn't have a chance to get up. His opportunity came when Omo finally broke through his guard, a sharp heel kick that smacked firmly against Sasuke's chin, hard enough to make the Uchiha's teeth clack shut, biting down on the tip and edges of his tongue hard enough to make him bleed. Even as he tasted copper, and his mouth throbbed with agony, his hands shot up, grabbing Omo by the ankle. Wah dash! Sasuke's hands burst into a pale blue glow, and Omo suddenly felt something ripping and tearing at his whole limb. He fell flat on his ass, one hand reaching for the limb that seemed perfectly fine. Sasuke's head rolled a bit, spitting out a wad of blood onto the floor as he rubbed his jaw with a healing palm. Chakra scalpels, he said. You won't be using that leg anymore. Omo glared at him, not a hint of lazy aloofness or whatever crazy he had when asking Sasuke to heal him. He gripped his swords, both points digging into the ground as he used them to haul himself up to his feet. Sasuke stared at him. Give up. You're just gonna get yourself even more hurt. Omo smirked. You wish you were that lucky. And then he was lunging at him, a single hop from his still functioning leg carrying him over to Sasuke, using one blade to catch his momentum, the other to swing. Sasuke danced out to the reach of the strike, going around his enemy to attack from the side before Omo, using the momentum from his own swing, kept himself spinning, dodging Sasuke's kick to catch himself with a handstand and lashing out with his good foot, nearly catching the Uchiha in the jaw again. Sasuke's eyes narrowed in irritation. Looks like I was damn right to cripple him before he got serious about this. Staying out of the boy's preferred range, Sasuke leapt into the air. Katon, Gokake no Jutsu. The fireball was hardly the largest Sasuke could make, but it was enough. Omo scrambled to get out of its range, using his blades as crutches and keeping his footing through the concussive shockwave, if only just. Sasuke slipped into, and past the smoke caused by the fireball, emerging out the other side with a barrage of shuriken and kunai. Again Omo proved himself more than adept at the blade, blocking and avoiding all the kunai blades that threatened him, only for 3 of them to suddenly burst into smoke as they landed at his sides. His surprise was clear, and even with that, he was able to kill 2 of the clones before the third did its job, slapping a burning explosive tag onto the sword that Omo immediately had to toss before it exploded in a fireball of twisted and broken metal. With only one sword now being used as a crutch, Omo blocked and parried and fought off the last of Sasuke's clones without receiving a single hit before finally dispelling the copy with a punch that hit the clone right in the throat. Then Sasuke's blue-shrouded hand was on his shoulder, the real Uchiha having approached him from behind with a yank. Omo's left arm fell limp, and Sasuke was once again at the Kumo-genin's back, a safe distance from that sword and any attack he could produce. You're done, Sasuke repeated. Don't make me have to disable all your limbs, Omo. The Kumo-genin sighed, aggravated as his last remaining arm and sword was straining to hold him upright. He paused. Have a really itchy nose right now. Sasuke felt like smacking his palm straight through his face. The proctor looked uncertain. Is that a surrender? Sasuke couldn't blame him for the question. Chapter 56. The best weapon a ninja had was the element of surprise. This, Naruto knew to be a fact. Whether it was surprise at the engagement itself, the time, the place, the enemy, a technique, or trap. When you caught an enemy by surprise, your chances of winning the fight went up by a lot. Get caught out yourself and your chances of dying went up similarly. The same principle, largely, held true for these exams. Sakura and Sasuke won both their initial fights by having a trick up their sleeve their enemy hadn't been expecting, disabling/injuring them before they realized how much danger they were really in and being able to properly retaliate. There were some exceptions, of course. Even with surprise and superior technique, sometimes the enemy was just too far out of your league, your preparations too few to bridge the gap in power between the two of you. Temari's fight against Lee had been like that, one of the few. She just didn't have the speed to keep up with Lee, and when he got a hold of her, she was as good as done, despite all the tricks and advantages she held. It was the exception, not the rule. But as soon as the next combatants came up on that screen, he felt as though he was about to see it happen twice in one day. "Oh no," he said, dismayed. Hyuga Hinata vs. Sabaka no Gaara. Hinata's picture was a gentle smile, winking at the camera with a confidence she hadn't had in his last life. Gaara's features were serious, solemn even, eyes hidden behind a blindfold, dressed in white as though in mourning. When the proctor escorted the two to the field, the crowd offered polite cheers and claps to cheer them on. Hinata waved at them, white eyes clear of the veins for now as Gaara walked beside her. The blind rage, the bloodlust just on the cusp of outright madness was absent from this Gaara, just as Hinata's timid nature was gone from her. But those seals, so many. He could spot them like brands on Gaara's flesh. The Sunanin hadn't gotten any better at sealing, but it seems they decided to supplement a lack of quality with quantity. "Woohoo!" Kiba cheered beside them. "Hey! Kurenai-sensei! Hinata's up! I see that, Kiba." Kurenai answered 2 rows behind them, sitting beside the beaming Mato guy. "Don't worry." Itachi's soft voice made him look at her, dark eyes looking down to the arena. "If anything happens, we're ready." He took a breath. She was right. He wouldn't let anything hurt his friends again. Down in the arena, Hinata eyed her opponent. Truthfully, Sabaka no Gaara was an opponent she would have preferred to have someone else fight first. He was the only one that didn't engage in any direct combat out of the entire Suna team during the previous portion of the exam, so she had no knowledge of what his tactics would have been. His brother Kankuro would have been laughably easy to defeat. Her Juken could eliminate his chakra strings as if they were never there, and once she closed the distance he was basically a dead man. Temari would have been tougher to deal with, but she knew taijutsu was not her preferred engagement. She could work with that. Gaara, however, outside of what seemed like a strong earth affinity, she knew absolutely nothing about, while with a little research anyone could discover the basics of how Hyugas tended to fight. She'd have to be careful here. She could make some deductions, but it was mainly revolving around his eyes. With a blindfold, that meant he was using other senses to compensate. Hearing and smell was a possibility given what she knew about Inuzuka, so was a Hone chakra sense, or a combination of all 3. An exploitable weakness. As the proctor looked to the 2 of them, Hinata took her fighting stance, watching as Gaara did the same, adopting a surprisingly basic stance. The proctor cut his hand straight down across the air. "Begin." Hinata activated her Byakugan. Gaara didn't waste a second. "Surrender." She raised an eyebrow. With her eyes she could read him like an open book. He was completely serious, but it wasn't arrogance or pride there. He was pleading with her. Utterly confident of his victory, but her features scrunched up. Perfect time for a mute to be facing a blind guy. Her primary means of communication being useless. Finding out more of his mindset through talking was out then. Annoying. She leapt into the air, high, deciding to not give him the chance to hear where she was coming from. Reaching into her shuriken pouch, she tossed 5, one after the other mid-flight, each one hitting the ground, inching closer and closer to Gaara's right side. Then she landed to his left as he turned to face the direction of the shuriken. She saw him realize his mistake, watched the chakra surge through his feet into the dirt between them. With a stomp onto that spot, her chakra lanced into the earth through the ball of her foot, ripping apart his hasty earth wall before it could even form, her hands lashing out to slap his shoulder and elbow, spearing the 2 points there with the minute bursts from her fingertips. With a kick that struck her in the stomach, Gaara backed away from her, gaining some distance with a one-handed cartwheel. Then he moved his arm. The arm she just disabled. Hinata felt her eyes widen just a bit. "You're good," the Sabaka said. "That would have taken anyone else out of the fight. But you'll never defeat my defenses. I'll ask again, please surrender." It was becoming clearer to her. The reluctance, the pacifist nature, The desire to avoid conflict, the deference she'd seen him display towards Tamari, the hesitation to enter a battle. He was afraid. Deathly afraid. Not of her, no, but of himself, of losing some kind of control the longer the fight went on. Too bad for him, giving up wasn't in her nature. Now, something he'd said, defenses. That told her enough. He'd defended from her attack somehow. She'd hit him clean, but he'd apparently defended somehow. She tightened her stance and rushed at him head on. If he was surprised by her headlong attack, he was quick enough to recover, slipping into his taijutsu stance and trading blows with her with pinpoint precision. The Juken was not a style meant to clash with another fighting style. It was not even meant to fight itself. With the palm strikes that could rupture organs, disable limbs, tear at ligaments, and seal tenketsu, conventional wisdom stated that anyone stupid enough to go toe-to-toe with the Juken would find themselves an internally bleeding mess in just a few short exchanges. But that wasn't happening here. Hinata watched the chakra of her blows sink into Gaara's flesh and do absolutely nothing to him, and as the fight went on, even Gaara's basic taijutsu was quickly beginning to gain him a decided edge in the exchange, punishing her strikes with elbows, knees, and counters that only her Byakugan, speed, and reflexes were allowing her to evade without a broken nose for her efforts. Hinata's eyes narrowed, a theory forming in her mind. Her open palms closed into tight fists. Her father would likely be spitting mad and howling at the bloody moon at the sight of Hinata's rapid shift from Juken into the bare basics of Mato Gai's iron fist fighting style. But her father wasn't here, she smirked. Knees bent in a decidedly low stance, both fists came crashing down onto Gaara's rising kick, knuckles smashing into the ankle with the sound of shattering ceramic. Hinata's smirk became predatory. "You taught her your style, Guy?" Naruto asked, with delighted surprise, turning his body to look up. The seat rose towards the green beast. Guy offered him a smile and a thumbs up. Kurenai-sen believed Hinata-san's taijutsu needed a backup, just in case. "I gave her some lessons this last month away from prying eyes." "Good instincts," he complimented sincerely. The red-eyed beauty was trying not to look too smug but failed miserably. He turned back to the fight. Gaara's face was a grimace, not in pain but in concern, as his hands tightened their defenses and Hinata proceeded to rip him apart. Knees, elbows, fists, and raw speed made it seem as though Hinata was everywhere at once, dancing around Gaara's simplistic taijutsu as though it was an afterthought, refusing to let him gain any breathing room as her hard fists shattered the layer of sand Gaara had been using to protect himself. He tried to shove his chakra into the ground, pull out some earth technique or other to gain some distance. The speed that he could do this was remarkable, but her feet were just plain faster. Each time Hinata was there, feet blasting the chakra he was channeling to pieces before pressing her attack on this sand skin of his. She'd never heard of such a technique. The chakra drain alone would be immense. But as a defense against the Juken, it was a brilliant solution. The chakra attacks were designed to get through the paper-thin layer of skin to do its damage. Make a layer of something above that to absorb the initial burst, and the rest of the chakra would just disperse by the time it hit the true flesh. Fascinating. She'd have to pick his brain, ask him how he came up with it. After she was done defeating him, of course. As the whole of his skin was now little more than cracking, peeling sand, he finally tried to lash out, countering with a hard right that would have caught her off guard had he not been telegraphing his intent to her eyes the whole time. She reached forward, fingers coiling around his forearm with a smile that, if he would have been able to see it, might have scared him as she gripped his wrist with one hand. The fingers of her free hand were on him then, slipping between the cracks of his sand skin, tiny knives of chakra finally finding their targets. She could see the surprised dismay on his face a split second before the blood rushed up and he coughed bright red. She twisted his arm, knee rising sharply to shatter the stretched elbow. He sensed her intent, and recovered faster than she'd ever seen anyone manage. She could have sworn she hit a lung. Twisting his body in a way she hadn't expected, he brought a kick up from out of bloody nowhere, clear across his body to clip her in the chin. She didn't let go of his wrist though, and with a harsh yank that she tried to pull him off balance, she felt something give and slip off him in her grip. She looked down. She was holding a bracelet, her Byakugan eyes seeing the dissipating wisps of chakra on the golden band. When she looked at Gaara, something was definitely wrong. Gaara was clutching at his wrist like it was on fire, his whole body shaking as his face was scrunched up in what looked like absolute agony. "Please," he whispered. "Please, just surrender. I'm begging you." Hinata's features tightened, looking to the bracelet in her hand before throwing it to the ground and deciding to press her attack. She saw it with the eyes of her family. The chakra covered him like an invisible shroud, sinking into the ground beneath their feet, ripping it to pieces, breaking it apart, making it malleable to his purpose. She felt the ground rolling beneath her feet like a roiling earthquake too far to really shake someone. When she reached him, it all came surging up. A wall of sand, her fist smashed right into it, and Hinata's chakra surged out of her fist into the sand wall. This was no gentle Juken strike, but a small explosion of chakra going off from her fist like an explosive tag, tearing at the chakra Gaara was using to control this mass of grains like cheap paper, ripping a hole straight through it, and delivering a series of rapid-fire strikes to tear at the rest of it before he could rally. Drawing two kunai, Hinata moved to shove them into the weakest parts of that still crumbling sand skin armor. Gaara's hands shot up, lightning quick, grabbing her by the wrists and stopping her attack before shoving her away with all of his, apparently considerable physical strength. Hinata flew backwards through the air, at least a good 15 feet. Hitting the ground on her feet, she skidded to a stop, looking at her opponent. His face was a rictus of agony, like he was struggling to hold back the weight of a crushing boulder. Then his features gained a strange calm, his body losing its rigid tension. He started to smile. The smile was wrong, twisted. A mockery of a true smile. It wasn't even insane. More like a thing had seen human smiles and was perverting one in an attempt to emulate what he'd seen on others. Then his eyes started glowing through the blindfold. It was an eerie yellow, just barely visible through the white cloth and bright daylight. But see it she did. Apparently, her opponent's fears of losing control had some kind of merit. When Gaara laughed, it was a gleeful, maddened thing, and the sand shot out of the ground like a living beast, seeking her out. The sand formed blades, row upon row of them shifting like grinding teeth. Her eyes saw his chakra flood the arena grounds, going all around her before the sand came up like boiling water bubbling out of a pot and surging towards her. "It's been so long since he let me out to play!" Her opponent laughed. She jumped, a move born out of desperation as she used her chakra to thrust her body into a spin. The sand rushed up, ready to ensnare her before the howling tearing of air from the Kaiten ripped the attack to pieces, allowing her to fall another few feet before the sand moved all over again, right beneath her, and rising like a sea monster to swallow her whole. Her world fell into dark, and the chakra around her was so thick even her Byakugan could hardly see anything beyond the nebulous cloud of it that surrounded her. Her chakra surged around her like a beast tearing at its restraints, trying to wrestle at least a modicum of control from Gaara, but it was no use, and before long Hinata could feel her lungs burning as a cold fear took over her body, and her mind struggled to find a way out. Her fingers slipped on sand, the coarse grains going through and around her grip like she was trying to grasp water. She felt it, like a poison crawling down her spine. He could feel her struggles, feel her choking, drowning. He was enjoying it. For the second time in her life, Hinata felt the first true vestiges of panic rising in her body, a blind, desperate fear as tears gathered in her eyes. She was going to die here. Then, light, sound, she sucked down a breath, feeling herself held in a cocoon of sand tight enough to make breathing difficult, and her attempts to desperately fill her lungs all at once, nearly impossible. She looked down at Gaara. The madness was there, lingering in his face and behind the glow of those eyes. "I want to hear it. Do you surrender?" She had no hands to speak, and his sand was keeping her head from moving at all. He was going to kill her. He wanted to kill her. That smile widened. "I'll take your silence as a no dash." Suddenly, her arms were free, her body was free, the sand exploding around her, dispersed by something she couldn't see before strong arms were around her waist. Her legs felt weak as they touched the ground, and she looked behind her to find, much to her surprise, Sasuke's sister, and Sakura and Sasuke's sensei standing in front of Gaara. The proctor immediately raised his hand. "Due to outside interference, Hyuga Hinata is disqualified from proceeding further. The fight goes to Sabaku no Gaara." But the crowd apparently wasn't listening, eyes riveted to the arena floor where the blonde and redhead were squaring off. "The fight's done," she heard Naruto say, his face completely devoid of his typical smile. "Go back now, before I force you to." Gaara's smile was enduring. "Force me!" He laughed, the hysterical chuckles increasing in pitch as the sand swirled and flowed at his feet before rushing forward like a forest of lances. Even to her eyes, Naruto was there, and then he was gone, the very chakra disappearing from her gaze for a split second. She just had a moment to see the trail of it dance past the grasping, seeking waves of sand, slipping through minute gaps too fast for anyone without her eyes to see. She just managed to register the surprise on Gaara's face a half-second before Naruto's hand gripped his skull, fingers pressing into his temple while the other grasped Gaara's wrist, the one she'd removed the bracelet from. His voice was too soft to hear now, but Hinata's eyes didn't need for her to hear to understand. Leave my friend alone, Shikaku. Hinata saw it with her eyes, the chakra surging through Naruto's tenketsu in a way she hadn't seen before. From anyone, flowing out of his fingers as he grasped Gaara's head, thumb and index finger pressed to his temples just above the cloth blindfold. Fuin! The word went off like a firework and Hinata saw Gaara's entire body go slack like a puppet with its strings cut. All of the chakra in his body sealing right up like a cork had been shoved into the mouth of a bottle, not letting a drop pour out past it. The chakra was focused around his wrist and head as Naruto released him, and then caught his body before it could fall, setting him down gently. The whole arena fell into a hush, seemingly catching up with what the hell had just happened. Then all hell seemed to break loose. People were screaming, cheering, others booing, calling them cheaters and a million other things. A voice through an intercom called for people to remain orderly in the stands, repeating the message as it was ignored. Her Byakugan was active, so she noticed them all quickly. Proctors, more than what had been there a moment before, seemed to surround them from out of nowhere, looking grim and stern-faced as Itachi-san offered her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. She saw others move towards Naruto and Gaara, with the last one also having the benefit of a stretcher before they were each escorted, or shoved in Naruto's case, out of the arena through a side door. Holy shit, Sakura breathed. Hinata-chan was fucking amazing. And Naruto-sensei and Itachi-sensei were fast. I didn't even see them move from the stands. Yeah. Sasuke breathed. I'm still trying to piece half of it together. Why'd they interfere though? You think that Gaara guy was gonna really hurt Hinata-chan? Don't know. Too damn far and too hectic to get a read, but probably. Don't think my sister or Naruto would have stepped in otherwise. Makes sense. That Gaara guy looked like he was just starting to get serious too. Sakura mused before letting out an amused sound. After that fight, all the other fights are gonna suck. She laughed. At least till I beat you. Sasuke smirked. Gotta get past Lee first. Think you can handle it? Sakura smirked. Oh. I have a trick or two that slipped past you up my sleeve. You're not escaping me publicly kicking your ass, Sasuke-kun. Unless you let that Gaara guy beat you into the dirt just to get away. Not even in your best dreams, Haruno. He chuckled. Chapter 57. Itachi had known, going in, that there would be consequences for their interference. Even so, the level of anger in the Kazekage's voice was a little surprising. Although they had attacked the last contestant Suna had in this tournament, his son to boot. She supposed in that light his anger was understandable. This is an outrage. The man's voice was a low snarl in the room. The leader of the Land of Wind looked at the Uchiha and Uzumaki as though the heat of his gaze alone could skewer them with 1,000 blades. They have interfered with the public spectator portion of the examination, specifically going after the last genin of my village from the competition, the strongest of the genin as well. The one who was to entice the most clients. They did. Mei agreed, sitting 2 chairs to the man's left, the raikage between them. They also moved to save one of their own from your genin. The exams are dangerous. Killing is authorized. The Kazekage shot back. The one your boy was about to murder. Sarutobi drawled, smoke wafting between his teeth. Is the heiress to the Hyuga clan. That changes nothing. Kitsuchi, the Tsuchikage, didn't smile, but Itachi could only assume he was very pleased by this turn of events. Or are we suddenly giving preferential treatment based on familial ties? Afraid I missed that memo. A sat like a great bear in his chair, a mountain of muscle that looked at the 2 shinobi with a face that seemed chiseled out of stone. What exactly did you do, boy? He asked, his voice like a rolling thunderstorm. Sealed his chakra. Naruto answered. 2 level 2 seals, one on the tenketsu where Hinata removed the medium for the previous seal, the other at the first gate. Side effects? A asked. Might have to use a bit more chakra than normal to do techniques for the first hour after he wakes up. The blonde shrugged. Maybe less than that. Not sure. An hour? The Kazekage asked. The next rounds will start long before that. Then a thought occurred to him. How long before he even wakes up? Another hour, maybe 2. The Kazekage looked murderous. So you've effectively eliminated my son from this competition entirely. Removed my village from the competition that is meant to attract clients to our country. This time, Naruto cringed. She didn't blame him. Put that way, it sounded and looked pretty bad. Scoffed. You're both to be fined. He turned his eyes towards Sarutobi and the still silent Kutu. 20,000 for the Chunin, 60 for the Jounin. To dash. Naruto's shout was half strangled in his throat when Itachi grabbed him hard enough by the shoulder for one to hear the bones cracking under her grip, his voice turning into a smothered squeak. They were getting off light if it was just a fine. Seems low dash. The Kazekage agreed with her. Considering how much potential revenue they cost my village. If your son wakes before the end of the tournament, he will be placed in the semi-finals, or final round if the semi-finals are done. I answered, looking to Konoha and Tsunagekyu's leaders. This arrangement is acceptable to all, I trust. It wasn't really a question. If anyone protested, she had little doubt A would tell them exactly how much their protests mattered. He turned his eyes back to them, holding up a single finger. You get one for free. Interfere again, and it will be much worse. Am I making myself clear? Itachi nodded, Naruto doing the same at another squeeze of his shoulder. It won't happen again. With a jerk of his head towards the door, A dismissed them, turning towards the proctor who had escorted them up here. Call for the next match to start. Yes, Reikage-sama. He answered with a bow before gesturing the two of them to follow. Once outside the Kage booth, the two were escorted by the proctors back to the general area, where someone decided to meet them. That must have been bracing. Naruto's spine immediately stiffened, while Itachi's black eyes turned lazily towards the voice. Orochimaru-sama. The Sannin smiled at the two of them stepping closer, hands clasped behind his back. This might be a problem. He drawled after a long moment of silence. What is? Naruto's question was sharp, impatient, as it usually was towards this man. Your interference, he said simply. If it had just been saving the Hyuga girl, that would be one thing. But removing the Kazekage's trump card in these exams for all intents and purposes. He tisked, almost mockingly. You're referring to the economic situation in Tsunagekyou? Itachi half-asked, half-stated. The Chunin exams are a way to attract clients. Orochimaru nodded. Suna has been bleeding client, primarily to Konoha's benefit. You think we should have let Hinata-chan get killed then? Naruto sneered. The Sannin offered a shrug of his shoulders. It certainly would have made things far less complicated. Naruto's snarl was almost beast-like in its ferocity. To hell with that. What's done is done regardless. The young man's one-time sensei waved off. I'm merely warning the two of you, on the return journey, be more watchful of our allies than you previously thought we need to be. The image we've fostered of having handily beaten Iwagakure might give the pause in betraying us, but shinobi alliances are notoriously fickle. Give them enough reason, economic or otherwise, to betray us, and they'll do just that. If they do betray us. Itachi cut in. I trust you have a plan? The man's smile got just a bit bigger. Always. Turning his head to the entrance of the seating area, he continued. I won't keep you further. He turned to walk away before suddenly snapping his fingers as though remembering something. Oh, and Naruto, tell that Haruno girl that she put on a most impressive display. He laughed at the look on the boy's face till he disappeared from view. The tournament continued after that. The next fight was between Tenten and Karui, Omoi's teammate. It was almost a repeat of Lee's fight with Temari in a way, with a mid-/long-range specialist pitted against someone who almost exclusively dedicated themselves to close-range combat. Kenjutsu, to be specific, using two swords, one a dagger that was almost large enough to be called a short sword, and the other a fairly large broadsword almost as tall was its wielder. The fact that she could not only carry it, but wield it with considerable speed attested to a ridiculous amount of physical strength for her size and age. Tenten demonstrated aptitude in close-range combat herself, to be sure. Whenever Karui closed the distance, she would fluidly draw on a summoned weapon from a slip of paper. She never seemed surprised by the weapon she drew and wielded it with a deft proficiency that spoke of long hours practicing each and every single one before she'd put distance between them with a flurry of thrown weapons, even going so far as to toss out a home-made shrapnel bomb or two through the exchange that she threw with enough pinpoint precision that she was always just outside of its potential blast radius. By the time the fight was drawing to a close, both girls were covered in a litany of cuts and bruises. Tenten's pink clothes were matted in blood and almost nothing white remained of Karui's white and black outfit. It was the longest fight these exams had seen yet. To the civilians, and even some of the shinobi on the lower brackets, it was quite thrilling, really. Both girls put on a full display of their skills and strengths, with each one countering and answering the attacks of the other. In the end, though, Karui seemed to just have that little bit of extra stamina or strength to finish the fight in her favor, hammering at Tenten's defenses with brutish, raw power that Tenten just didn't have the strength or speed left to repel. It was the dagger that did it. So focused was she on the massive broadsword that by the time she realized what was happening, it was too late, and a slice just under her right breast had her on the ground. The Chunin called it there, tossing a look in Naruto and Itachi's general direction. It was a good thing he called it too, because Tenten looked like she was ready to keep going anyway, wound or no wound. The remaining fights were nothing noteworthy. 2 of the students from Haku's team took on one boy from Kusa, another from Kumo. The real upset, however, was Niji. Now, when a Hyuga fights a taijutsu or kenjutsu specialist, the conclusion is basically a foregone one that said Hyuga is going to win. After all, Lee had enough power in a single punch to outright flatten any genin in this tournament with laughable ease, but he could never beat Hyuga Niji no matter how hard he tried. That's how much of an advantage Niji had in any close combat engagement. So when the third of Kurabi's students, Samui, made her way into the stage with a wakizashi strapped to her waist and looking like she knew how to use it, Naruto felt kind of bad for her, truth be told, to have the shit luck to draw her one true counter right off the bat. Then of course, the match started and that pity turned to surprise before quickly getting turned on to Niji instead. The Hyuga was getting butchered out there. Samui was fast. Really fast. Even for a Chunin or particularly weak Jounin, she would have been fast. She wasn't as fast as Lee, but she had one advantage Lee didn't have, or make use of: her sword. When Niji would strike against Lee, he would have to block, make physical contact. Even without the palm, from contact with the forearm alone damage would be done. Samui wasn't giving him that contact. She was just cutting him. Lightning quick with razor-sharp precision, her blade would find its way to intercept Niji's palm strike. By the time the second minute of the match was ticking by, Niji's fingers and hands looked like they'd been put through a blender, bleeding profusely from his fingertips. He hadn't managed to land a single hit on his aloof blonde opponent. Frankly, Naruto suspected the only reason he hadn't lost his hand entirely, or his fingers for that matter, is that Samui didn't want to completely destroy his career. He remembered she had foresight like that in his last life. If she was fighting Hinata, it might be a different ball game. Hinata had zero qualms about supplementing the Hyuga's fighting style with things to cover its bases and weaknesses, as seen by her adopting elements of Gai's style to rip through Gaara's defenses earlier. Niji, however, Niji was a purist, who believed the Hyuga taijutsu and techniques were all he'd ever need if mastered to their absolute highest level. He wasn't at that level yet, so who knows if that was true or not in the end, but right now, he was getting a very rude awakening. In the end, it wasn't a blow or wound that decided the fight. Naruto had forgotten just how stupidly pessimistic Niji had been in this stage in his life. Samui told him he was simply too weak to match her, and he accepted it, surrendering to fate, or whatever that stupid shtick was. Maybe he'd have to give him another ass-kicking too. No. That wouldn't work this time. He remembered it was his status as a nobody that hammered the point home last time. This time he had status. Maybe get Hinata to kick his ass? That could work. And it was always good to have joint team sessions with Team 6. Hinata was surprisingly funny once you got used to reading the rapid-fire hand signs. Then it was time for the second rounds and Naruto felt himself get just a bit more excited. Lee and Sakura were up next. No! I refuse to do this. I will not harm such a delicate flower. Lee Tenten, now bandaged and sitting in one of the available benches, snarled at her hard-headed teammate, who was prostrating himself with tears in his eyes in front of Sakura, who looked decidedly uncomfortable with the green-dressed boy holding her hand. This is a tournament. Sakura knows she came here to get punched in the face. Now you get in there, and punch her right in her perfect cheekbones, goddammit. Don't love me too much, Tenten. Sakura deadpanned. He's the last of us in this tournament, she protested. I am not having him give up because he thinks he's in love with you. I am in love with Stay out of this, Lee. It doesn't involve you. I'm feeling pretty involved. I think it's sweet. Sakura smiled, watching as Lee seemed to puff up where he knelt. Oh no! Tenten pointed from where she sat. You stop that right now. I know what you're doing. Sakura's smile was sweet enough to give cavities. Then, marching in from out of left field, came Hinata, smiling as she patted Sakura in the shoulder, knelt beside Lee and proceeded to make hand signs to talk with the young man. Lee looked at her, reading her sign language. Well, yes, but dash. More signs. But what if dash? More signs. You think that will war dash? More signs, faster and more enthusiastic. Suddenly, Lee's face changed, losing its hesitation before a determined glint came to his eyes as he stood up, looking at Sakura right in the eye. Sakura-chan. I will fight you! Let us both do our best! Sakura looked at both girls, who looked fairly triumphant at Lee's declaration. I am seriously beginning to rethink our friendship, guys. Chapter 58. As had happened with Hinata and Gaara, Naruto felt himself wince just a bit as the names came up on the board. Well, shit. He trained Sakura well. He knew Itachi had trained Sakura well, but he just couldn't see in any way for Sakura to beat Rock Lee. His speed advantage was just too much. Maybe if Sakura went all out and used potentially lethal force she might have a chance. But he knew her better than that. Even if she were offered the chance to jump straight to Jounin winning here, she'd never resort to outright lethal force. You believe she'll lose? Itachi drawled beside him. You saw how fast Lee was, Naruto said. You really think she can match that? No, came the simple answer, almost nonchalant in its delivery. But I also saw Mato Guy's student holds back too much. Naruto blinked. Well, yeah, Lee's a nice guy. He might win despite that. She nodded, a small smirk tugging on her lips. But she'll make him pay for it before he does. If he wins, it won't be while holding back, she boasted. Now, Naruto was really excited to see just how much Itachi had taught the Pinkette. Could you go back to wanting to give up again, Lee? It was a joke, but only half of one. After seeing Lee's speed against Temari, she was not at all thrilled to be taking it on now. She never fought someone this fast besides Naruto and Itachi, and the two had always held back just enough for her to actually be able to see where they were coming from. She doubtedly would give her the same courtesy seeing as how he was fighting to win, not teach her. In response, Lee shook his head. I'm sorry, Sakura-chan, but Hinata-san is right, and has shown me that I must fight you in this contest. He took a fighting stance. Sakura smiled down at Hinata. She had a trump card, something she was pretty sure would net her the win, but she wanted to save it for her fight with Sasuke. He'd picked up quite a few tricks, especially in the healing arts, but she was fairly sure he hadn't quite gotten to the one that would save him if she played her cards right. If she didn't use it on Sasuke, he would probably outlast her with his self-healing and bigger chakra reserves. But if she didn't use it on Lee, she might not make it to Sasuke at all. Decisions. Let's just see how this plays out. Might get lucky and have him trip up or something. Drawing two kunai herself, Sakura took a low, tight stance, defensive. The Chunin's hand cuts the air between them. Begin! Lee, as expected, attacked first. She knew he was fast, but seeing it happen to Temari and experiencing Lee suddenly closing a 5-meter gap before she could blink was a whole different experience. His closed fist slammed into her stomach, knocking the wind out of her. She kept her senses though, latching onto the limb with both arms before he could pull back. He brought up a knee that hit her in the ribs and Sakura felt what little breath she'd taken shoved out of her again, feeling like she was gonna throw up. With irresistible strength, Lee snapped his arm out of her grip, driving an elbow into the hard bone of her chest, shoving her back and offering a soft kick to drive her further away. He then realized there was a chain linking the two of them, coiled around his wrist, tied to a kunai in Sakura's hand. The green beast blinked in stupefied surprise as Sakura let herself smile. With a shout, she smashed her fist down to the earth, well past her elbow, hard enough to yank Lee forward on the now taut chain link. The soft dirt of the stadium grounds hardened to solid rock as she extracted her hand and pounced. Lee realized the danger he was in as he hastily began to try and untie the knot of the chain, only to have to raise his knee to intercept Sakura's kick, abandoning his attempts to untie it entirely as his sole remaining free hand moved to try and block Sakura's rapid-fire assault. He was faster than her, stronger, but tethered down to one spot. Much of his speed and much of his power were cut down to something she could manage. Even so, she realized quickly that she would never win this fight like this. Even down to one arm and largely immobile, Lee was just plain better than she was at taijutsu. Drawing two more of her kunai knives, it took every ounce of her skill to get in close enough to slice off Lee's kunai holster on his hip, and even that was probably done only because he assumed she was aiming for the artery instead. The holster hit the ground and she kicked it away before she herself leapt back. Lee suddenly realized his mistake. His head snapped towards the holster, now too far away to reach for before snapping his eyes towards her as she drew a plethora of kunai and shuriken. She let loose. She was no Tenten, but she was no slouch in accuracy either. For all that though, Lee still made dodging the rain of metal look like it was second nature to him. Weaving and twisting himself, even within the confines of the chain's tether. Then she noticed him going back to untying the chain on his wrist. Sakura grit her teeth, mulling over her next decision. She didn't want to escalate things this much. Especially not against a friend. She drew her explosive tags. The next volley was accompanied by 3 lit tags. Lee saw them, and his attempts ceased as his stance widened, standing perfectly still. Sakura felt her eyes go wide with shock. "What the hell are you doing?" She felt herself scream, horrified that he was just gonna sit there and take all 3 bombs to the proverbial face. Her horror turned to surprise, and then to horror of a different kind. Lee's hands moved lightning fast, catching all 3 kunai mid-air in a single, fluid motion before turning them right around and stabbing them into the dirt around the rock anchoring him in place. Oh shit! Lee pulled himself as far as possible, laying himself flat on the dirt a split second before the explosions went off. A cloud of dust swallowed Lee whole. Sakura couldn't see anything as her feet hit the ground again, her hands coming up to a defensive stance, the last 2 of her knives in them. She wasn't stupid enough to think Lee would let himself get caught twice. She should use it now. If Lee, her thoughts were cut off as a solid chunk of rock came soaring out of the cloud, too fast to react, too fast to really even see before it nailed her straight in the ribs. She heard, more than felt, the sickening crack of bone. Her feet lifted off the ground before she hit the dirt hard. The rock was yanked back, and she opened her eyes enough to see Lee, marching out of the cloud, chain and rocks spinning in practiced, decisive movements. A gravity hammer. She just handed Lee a gravity hammer. And he apparently knew exactly how to use it. She coughed, tasting blood, and tried to find the strength to reach her feet. "Sakura-chan," Lee called, bringing her eyes up to him. He looked at her sadly. "Please give up. You're hurt." She swallowed metal, humming at the back of her throat with something that approximated a smile on her face. If she used it now, could she win? Maybe. Did she have enough time for it to work? Lee was fast. If he was really against the ropes, would he take her out quick so the proctor could call it before it worked? Probably. Her thoughts churned in her mind, slow and foggy with pain. If she used it now, she stood a 50-50 chance of winning, depending on Lee. Hirano. The proctor's voice brought her back to reality, snapping her eyes towards him as she sucked in some blood that had dribbled to her lower lip. "Can you continue?" he asked neutrally, hands clasped behind his back, face blank. It was her choice. Her choice. Then she was gonna make sure they won this damn exam. She shook her head. "I'm no proctor. I can't." She looked to Lee, smiling. "You got me, Lee." He smiled back, though it was tinged with sadness she was grateful to note. As the proctor called the match in his favor, Lee dropped the rock and chain from its ready stance and moved to help her make it to the Chunin medics. "Lee." "Yes, Sakura-chan? Tell Sasuke to come see me really quick. I need to tell him something before his next fight." "Of course, Sakura-chan." Lee helped her to the medics, laying her gently on a stretcher beside the Chunin as he ran off to go get Sasuke. She laid flat on her back, trying not to breathe too deep, or too fast, or move too much, or lay still enough to feel tense and stiff, or do anything that resembled, living. The medic scanned her, casually informing her that 2 of her lower ribs were broken to go along with the cuts and bruises, and that her left wrist had twisted and was swelling. When the hell did that happen? She stared up as she lay on her back, one half of her sight finding the canopies that shaded the stadium seats, the other the blue sky dotted by thin gray clouds. "Sakura-chan, I brought Sasuke," Lee called, appearing in her vision. She smiled. "Thanks, Lee." He smiled back. "You did really great, Sakura-chan." Her expression grew just the faintest bit sad. "Don't be nice to me yet, Lee. You might think I'm a complete bitch before the day's done." He looked confused. He should be. She shouldn't have given him so blatant a warning either. But then before he could ask anything else, Sasuke was there, standing across from Lee, filling the other half of her sight. "Got your ass kicked, huh?" She glared, wishing so badly to just reach up and punch him. Her temptation almost won over her desire to see Team 7 win in the end. But only just. Lee, give us a sec? Lee nodded, his smile returning full force before he walked away. Thanks, Lee. She forced herself to shout, ignoring the sharp pain and the Chunin hissing beside her. She looked to Sasuke, he looked back at her. She did good. Naruto cheered. HN. Was the sound Itachi deigned to release from the back of her throat. Blue eyes turned to her, squinting. What? Why are you mad? She did good. Better than I thought. Her lips twisted just a bit. Doesn't make sense, she should have done better, fought smarter. Your expectations are too high. He disagreed. Everyone makes mistakes, especially in a Chunin exam. She did good. Itachi crossed her arms in what, to him, seemed like stubborn disagreement. Naruto turned away. Sasuke's up next. No, he's not. She countered. His opponent would have been Gaara. Oh. He cringed, smiling a little sheepishly. Right. As expected, a few minutes later the Chunin proctor marched out. Due to outside interference dash. He could have sworn a dozen eyes turned towards them in that moment. He tried not to look sheepish. Sabaku no Gaara of Sunigakure is unable to fight at this time. As such, we will move on from his battle with Uchiha Sasuke from Konoha and on to the next contestants. Sasuke fingered the new vial as he walked back to the waiting area, looking at the clear liquid inside it with a newfound sense of pride in his teammate/friend. If she'd have sprung this on him in their fight, he would have been well and truly fucked. If that Gaara guy never showed up, Lee would be his next opponent. He had no intention of repeating Sakura's mistake and holding back. Lee was too damn fast, and if he kept that improvised gravity hammer, too goddamn dangerous. Just like Omoe, hit him hard before he got serious, ended fast. He placed the vial in a padded pocket in his holster as he opened the main door to the waiting area. Marching past the proctors, he found his way to the door that let them spectate, only for the door to be yanked open just before his hand brushed the knob and for someone to walk right out. She looked for all intents and purposes like the cat that ate the canary. Hinata-cha dash. He stopped. Byakugan, see-through walls, peerless lip reader. He scowled at the now smug-looking girl. You know everything, don't you? Her smile threatened to split her face as she started to make signs. I never knew she had it in her. Sakura-chan got clever. He nodded. You gonna tell anyone? She shrugged, hands moving. Already got Lee to fight. Did my part. Up to him to fight smart now. While he appreciated that, it made him rather confused. So, this is Dash. He gestured between them, and she was the utter picture of confusion. He decided to clarify. Blackmail? Threats? Moral judgment saying that we're cheating? I'm a bit lost when you just leave it without the possibility of telling someone. She huffed. Oh, I just have to talk about it, you boring idiot. Do you have any idea how hard it's gonna be to sit through another 2 matches on this with Tenten and Lee right there in the room? Tenten's gonna flip. She might try stabbing Sakura when she finds out. Get some guards. I'll keep that in mind. He wasn't entirely sure if she was serious or not. As such, he didn't know if he himself was being sarcastic or not. It was all very confusing. Oh. We need to decide on a signal for you to give me before you do it. What? Why? Wanna activate my Byakugan a second before you do it so I can see the full glory of Tenten's expression. You seriously have no idea how hilarious she looks when she gets angry. At other people, at least. It's scary when it's directed at you. She giggled. With her ruined voice box, it wasn't a pretty sound, but Sasuke could feel a smile tugging at his own lips just a bit. Sakura really should reconsider these friendships of hers, he muttered, receiving a sharp punch to the shoulder before she rolled her eyes and finally let him pass into the spectating area. Chapter 59. The next 2 fights in the tournament had the 2 Kumo Kunoichi pitted with a different genin from Kiri and IWA. Karui, the one who fought Tenten earlier, was up against one of Haku's genin, the girl. While both had their share of scratches and exhaustion, Karui had come into the fight worn out the most, on account on her fight with Tenten. As such, it was patently obvious, even to non-ninja, that the girl was moving slowly, and that her reactions and evasions were sluggish. The power behind her swings of that broadsword tapered off quickly after the initial burst. The fight was practically decided at the outset. Being Kimimura's student, fighting a melee user was an old hat to the Kiri genin, and she easily danced around Karui's attacks to draw her into a trap, disarming her in one movement, then slicing the back of her knee with the next. At that point the Chunin called it, even as the fire-spitting Kumo girl was threatening to gnaw her opponent's legs off. Samui was practically the exact opposite of Karui, being the strongest of B's students, and making that fact well known in her second fight. She was, to all locals and quite a few foreigners, the favorite to win the whole thing. Whereas she showed her dominance in taijutsu when she went up against Niji, the IWA Genin boasted a rock-solid arsenal of ninjutsu, and not just earth elements, but water and fire as well. Of course, he had no answer for lightning, the primary weakness of the biggest chunk of his punching and defensive power techniques, which happened to be Samui's primary element. But even so, few genin of her age could boast the taijutsu chops to bring a hyuga to heel and also be adept enough at ninjutsu to handle their elemental affinity so deftly as well. She could probably drop out of the tournament entirely right now and the proctors and kages would declare her a chunin without a second thought. Then the second rounds were over, and they were back up to the start, with two of the last four names appearing on the board. Uchiha Sasuke vs. Rock Lee. Naruto heard the crowd cheer long and loud as the semifinals finally started. Lee, the blonde had noticed, had actually become something of a fan favorite amongst the spectators, particularly the civilians. Naruto's hearing, sharper than most, allowed him to pick up snippets of conversation here and there, and a great many of them were centered around Lee. Ninjutsu, genjutsu, traps, trickery, mind games, a lot of it went over the heads of civilians. How could they understand a 3-layered genjutsu? Or the incredible feat of chakra control it took to properly utilize razor wire hidden in your hair? Or even the complexities of a simple chakra scalpel? A ninja could appreciate these things, especially when watching young genin and their utter lack of experience pulling it off and making it look easy when in reality it took months and months of training. But a civilian couldn't. Not really. But Lee was giving them something they could see, feel even. A proper, honest fight. Sure, his speed was something they could barely keep up with, but that just made him all the more impressive in their eyes. They liked Lee's fights, and they wanted to see more. Naruto was glad. Too often Lee was overshadowed, either by his teammate Niji or his sensei. Seeing him get some much-deserved recognition made him feel a strange sort of satisfaction on his friend's behalf. Naruto. The voice made him turn, leaning forward to look at Akane sitting on Itachi's other side. Huh! What's up, Akane-chan? The youngest member of Team 7 looked pensive, serious even. It was an unusual look on her. Is it bad that I kinda want to cheer for Lee-kun? She smiled sheepishly. You can always cheer for both. He ventured, smiling a bit. Seemingly getting an idea, the girl primly closed her eyes, hopped off her seat and started walking off like the princess she was in all but name. Naruto blinked, confused, but he figured there was nothing to really worry about, so he decided to turn his attention down to the arena as his two friends marched out. The two Konoha genin marched to the center of the arena, with Lee looking decidedly more battle-worn than his Uchiha opponent. Sasuke's fight with Oma had been relatively fast, whereas Lee's fight with Temari had been a dragged-out affair and his fight with Sakura had been short, but the girl had managed to press Lee harder than Temari had. You should give up, Sasuke warned. I'm not like Sakura. This will get painful for you. It is not in my nature to give up, Sasuke-san. Lee shot back with a determined glint in his eye. I expected as much. The Uchiha groused, just before the Chunin sliced his hand across the air between the two of them. Begin. Lee didn't hesitate, and with that speed that had brought down Temari and Sakura, he lunged towards Sasuke. Sasuke shifted, and as Lee cocked back his fist to deliver a solid blow, he saw Sasuke's foot crunch down on something on the ground. No, not on it. There hadn't been anything underneath. A cloud of dark miasma exploded around the two of them, darker than a regular smoke bomb, with an odd, nauseating smell. Lee breathed in a lungful before he found his legs under him and leapt clear of the noxious fume. As the cloud dissipated, Sasuke was still there, still in the center. Lee saw him in time to toss away a vial. Sasuke stared at him with cold, dark eyes. Like I said, I'm not like Sakura. He drawled again, raising his head a little bit. She held her trump card in hopes of using it against someone else. But you're just too damn fast, Lee. Lee felt his chest growing tighter, static on his fingernails. Poison? What you just breathed in is a paralyzing nerve agent. Sasuke continued. That tingling you feel at your fingertips, that's the poison starting to take effect. He wasn't sure if it was the poison, or Sasuke's words, but Lee found he could barely even breathe. You have about 160 more seconds, Sasuke warned. After that, your muscles will lock themselves so tight you'll feel as if you're made out of stone. The fight's mine. You just poisoned yourself too, Lee protested. Sasuke gestured towards the vial. And I just drank the antidote. Lee's features grew severe, darkening. I see. You truly are a good shinobi, Sasuke-san. I didn't even notice you plant this trap during your fight, and you never would have. The Uchiha muttered with something that sounded vaguely like a laugh. Still, Lee continued unperturbed. 160 seconds. That means I have just over 2 minutes to beat you. You can try, Sasuke conceded. Lee's stance widened, fists going to his side. Then there's no time to take it easy on you either. Sasuke was very, very glad he had decided to use this now, as Lee's body started to visibly glow. I thought he couldn't use chakra, then his skin turned a worrying shade of red. When Lee tensed up into a ready stance, Sasuke wasn't at all prepared for the ground at the taijutsu specialist's feet to simply explode beneath him. But suddenly Lee went from over there to right here, moving so fast Sasuke only saw him because Lee deemed it necessary to slow down to actually land his bloody punch. Even the reflex to think of putting his guard up didn't even have the time to fully register in his brain before he realized he'd been punched in the face and knocked into the dirt. The scattered, confused and disorganized thoughts in his head didn't have time to sort themselves out before he felt something grab him by the ankle. His whole body literally flung through the air a second later like a toy. He spun as he flew, the world becoming a blur of motion before Sasuke gathered his wits at long last and shifted his momentum. The spin was too much to stop. He turned his body just enough for his feet to touch the ground, trying to grip it with chakra, the drag sending him tumbling onto his ass with a backward roll that let him reach his feet, backpedaling a bit more to keep his balance before his back hit the unyielding wall of the arena. If he would have hit it the speed Lee tossed him, he probably wouldn't have gotten back up. Whatever time he had, he was immediately put on the defensive again, as he saw Lee lunging towards him with a jump kick. With a curse and a split-second thought, Sasuke just managed to escape with a kawarimi, the remains of Sakura's bomb taking the blow for him. Lee sent it hard enough into the wall that the tiny, near-weightless husk shattered and buried itself into the stonework. Sasuke allowed himself to suck down a deep, shuddering breath, looking at Mato Guy's student with a newfound level of respect and wariness that hadn't been there before. He really was the one that was gonna win the whole thing. Or he had been. Lee turned, spotting him, and there was no time for Sasuke to continue his musings or gather his breath as the taijutsu specialist rushed headlong towards him. I can see him now. He's already getting slower. Just have to hold on a little longer. He drew 5 kunai, kneeling and stabbing 2 of them into the ground in front and behind him, 2 more to his left and his right as his chakra surged into the last one still gripped in his hand. Lee was on him, leg already moving to offer one of those brutal kicks. The relentless speed was just insane. Lightning surged from the point of the kunai in Sasuke's hand, jumping from the point to the ring of the kunai he'd stabbed into the ground. Then jumping to another ring and another. Lee's kick found itself caught in the surge, the electric shock rushing through his limb and flinging him off with a cry of pain. I don't have to beat you, Lee, Sasuke breathed. This technique was absolutely murderous on his reserves. If he could get Lee in here, he could cage him in the lightning, but it could work, for now, as a defensive measure. All I need to do is outlast you. If Sakura had been the one to use this, her victory would have been assured. Her earth element had so many defensive applications it wasn't even funny. Hell, if she was really desperate she could just bury herself beneath the dirt till Lee was well and truly paralyzed. A much more chakra-effective defense than what Sasuke had thrown together in his desperation. Lee's legs shook with sporadic muscle twitches as he reached his feet, gathering his strength as he looked at Sasuke. Then he started running. Not towards Sasuke, no, circling him, picking up speed, faster and faster, the incredible burst potential he'd shown seemingly gone now as the poison wore on. Sasuke grit his teeth, nervous despite himself, as his sharp gaze focused on keeping Lee in his sight. He was almost a blur now, almost fast enough to disappear from Sasuke's view entirely but not quite, and still beginning to slow more and more. Lee sensed it too, because he suddenly turned and pounced on Sasuke in a full deadhead charge. Chakra surged through Sasuke's fingertips and into the kunai blade, lightning blooming across his vision focused on where Lee was coming from, crackling through the air. Lee's body hit the wall of snapping energy, the bandages on his fists burning, his whole hand beginning to burn with it. Then he was through. Lightning danced across Lee's body as Sasuke felt those fists crash into his chest, followed a moment later by Lee ducking down and bodily tackling him, lifting the Uchiha clear off his feet to remove him from the lightning cage. Sasuke hit the ground and felt the wind knocked out of him. Lee's body smoked and twitched. The pain of God only knew how much voltage surging through him was not something even his monstrous constitution could shrug off. Sasuke acted fast. Pain or no pain, air or no air, he couldn't let Lee get his bearings. With a sharp elbow he felt and heard Lee's nose crunch, the spurt of dark blood staining Sasuke's clothes before a second elbow came down on the top of Lee's skull, literally beating the green-clad boy off of him before Sasuke scrambled to his feet. He managed to get 2 more hits in, a kick to the face and a grab of the arm to try to put Lee in some kind of hold before Mato Gai's student finally seemed to snap back into his body, hands moving fluidly and with unerring precision to turn aside Sasuke's grab and immediately twist it to his advantage, grasping onto Sasuke's right wrist and bending it fast and hard enough to nearly break the limb outright. Sasuke's body bent, following the motion. Drawing a kunai with his free hand, he sliced at Lee's exposed forearm. He drew his hand away at the last second, allowing Sasuke to get out of his grip with a surge of strength and back away. Katan! He sucked down a breath, breathing out the first fireball attack he ever learned to try and get some distance between him and Lee. Gokaki no Jutsu! The fire hit the ground and stayed there, fueled by chakra, only for Lee to seemingly not give a flying shit about it as he literally rushed straight through the flames. Sasuke couldn't even put up his guard as Lee's hand grasped him by the face and proceeded to slam him down into the dirt. Sasuke felt his brain rattle in his skull, feeling dirt and rock scratching at his back before he thought fast, chakra scalpels coming to his hands and reaching for Lee's leg beside him. He felt the muscles give, just as he felt Lee's entire body stumble, trying to continue its run before reality bloody well set in and Lee fell flat, rolling onto the floor as he let Sasuke go, and the Uchiha was so grateful to Sakura in that moment for having the foresight to plant that bomb during her fight with Kankuro, for even giving him a chance against this insanity. More on adrenaline than any real thought, Sasuke reached his feet, his vision swimming in his skull as he tried to hold down his lunch with a sudden bout of nausea before he finally caught sight of Lee. Lee scrambled to his feet and Sasuke tried to think of some plan, some escape, some other means of stalling Mato Gai's monster of a student when Lee stumbled and fell to his knees again, breathing hard through his mouth as his blood dripped from his nose. Lee's muscles tensed, his body trying to find the strength to keep going when the red seemed to fade from his skin, the veins along his temple receding back to his body. And Sasuke found he was suddenly exhausted. The aches that hit him all of a sudden with that palpable relief had his knees go weak, and he fell flat on his ass with deep, panting breaths, back hitting the floor as the proctor called to Lee. "Genin Rock Lee, can you continue to fight?" Sasuke opened one eye, tilting his head just enough to look at Lee. Lee was gritting his teeth, every muscle tense, taut as a bowstring, and then, impossibly, he started to get back up. Sasuke's eyes widened, in both shock and dismay. What the hell was it going to take? The Uchiha tried to find his strength, muster the will to pick himself up one more time. He didn't know where he found it, but he did, reaching his feet at the same time that Rock Lee did. "I find Rock Lee incapable to continue," the proctor suddenly said, and Sasuke felt it like a punch to the gut. He looked at Lee through blurry vision, and found that the last burst of strength had helped Lee reach his feet, but nothing more. Lee's muscles were locked stiff, Sakura's poison having finally reached its full effect. Sasuke heard the proctor announce him as the winner before he finally let himself fall flat onto the arena floor. His last sight before he passed out was Naruto's stupid banner, hanging over the rafters. The one cheering him on. He didn't remember there being a good luck Lee in smaller characters just underneath his name, would have lost if Lee had luck. He thought just before the medics arrived and his body finally gave out. Chapter 60. I do not see it. The boy was arrogant, reckless, and fell too easily for the girl's traps because of it. If he makes it to Chunin, it will not be with my vote. A's voice was like stones grinding together. The constant sneer on his features did not soften in the slightest, even when talking about the Kazekage's son. Naruto stood to the side, hands behind his back with the other sensei. Guy and Kurenai were to his left, Baki and another Suna sensei to his right. Past them were a lot of Kumogakure sensei and finally Haku-chan and the sensei from Kiri. After that were the guys from IWA. I agree. Mei nodded. If the boy would have been more observant, things might have turned out differently. But as it stands, he overestimated himself and underestimated his opponent. Not a desirable trait in a Chunin. The Kazekage held up his hand, silencing them. My son disappointed me with his performance. I will not add further shame by giving a vote he does not deserve, so unless our colleagues from Konoha and IWA by some miracle find themselves in agreement to granting him a promotion, let us move on. Sarutobi made a gesture with his hand, dismissive. Katsuchi said nothing. A nodded sharply. Haruno Sakura, his opponent. Naruto felt himself nearly giddy with anticipation and nervous with dread all at once. This Sakura was much stronger than she'd been in his world when she went for the Chunin exam. In his mind, she was absolutely ready for this, especially after he found out she'd planted that poison bomb Sasuke ended up using against Lee. But while she was indeed stronger and smart as all hell, she had some pretty high standards to meet with and IWA was always going to vote against the Konoha Genin, probably out of spite if he were any judge, though Sarajiji might do the same, so all was fair, he supposed, which meant that if she just lost one more vote, which was easy given that she handed the Kazekage some humility by proxy, she might not make it at all. Immediately, one of those concerns was alleviated. I abstain, the Kazekage said, eyes closed, a barely concealed anger tightening the expression on his face. Mei shrugged. I have no objections. She was smart, read her opponent, planned ahead and executed that plan to perfection. When her plan failed against Rock Lee in a later bout, she failed to adapt. Abe pointed out. On the contrary, Sarutobi defended. She realized quickly she could not defeat Lee in a straight fight and came up with a strategy on the spot to defeat him. It may have failed, but it does show a level of creative thinking not many genin have. Yes. After she saw what Rock Lee was capable of in his fight with Sabaka no Tamari, Katsuchi countered. She had plenty of time to think between the fights. After that plan she came up with failed, she gave up. A Chunin that gives up so easily is a deserter. Not a good soldier. I'll note your concern for the quality of our military in my journal tonight, Tsuchikage. Gentlemen, Mei warned with a smile before turning back to A. We have 2 ice and 1 nay, Reikage Dano. It falls on your word. A snorted. I suppose she did well enough for a genin fighting a friend in this setting. She will get her promotion without the need for the tiebreaker vote. Naruto had to force himself to swallow down the whoop of elated joy and hold still, literally shaking in his boots as he pinpointed exactly where Sakura was through his chakra sense to get ready to bolt out the door and tell her as soon as this was over. The eyes have it then. A drawled. Let's continue. Rock Lee and Sabaka no Tamari. The girl had the right idea, Mei pointed out. Keep her distance. But not the power to do anything more, or put her opponent down, the Tsuchikage answered. Rock Lee is hardly your typical opponent though. Not for a genin, the Kazekage stated. No, he is not. A conceded the point, though it seemed grudging. He dominated that fight against her, was in control the entire time. His promotion is hardly in question here, Mei said. He might not make jounin with the inability to use ninjutsu or defend against genjutsu, but pretending he will stay a genin is something we're all a little past, I believe. The question is Sabaku. All eyes, none too subtly, turned to the Kazekage, who seemed to only just manage to not roll his eyes. I abstain. The Mizukage made a noise, hand rising to cup her chin. Though she had the right idea, when she saw that her plan wasn't working, she failed to even try to adapt outside of fighting him in hand-to-hand when he finally had hold of her. I am torn about this one. A also seemed to be giving it some serious thought. He finally growled something of an answer. Rock Lee is a shit measuring stick, he snarled. Hiruzen released a plume of smoke from his lips. While it is true that she failed to adapt, I cannot say many Chunin wouldn't have had a similar problem. A promotion to Chunin does not exclude those who do not show a need for improvement, but rather the next step in a long road. Just as with Rock Lee, to pretend a kunoichi with such deft and extreme control of a wind affinity should remain as a genin is to do her and the rank a disservice. He concluded with a small tilt of the head. She has my vote. Mei shrugged. You've convinced me, Sarutobi-san. She nodded, looking to A. My vote as well. The Reikage turned to Katsuchi. Abstention. Either he agreed with Hiruzen and didn't want to admit it, or simply could not make up his mind. A nodded. With 2 abstentions and 2 ice, the ayes have it. Next contestants then? Mei smiled. The next contestants, Uchiha Sasuke and Kyumo's own Omo. The man actually paused to think. I have seen Omo's skills for myself. I was sure he would pass this exam. But this must be based on what was seen, not what we know, and what was seen was not enough. He fails. He did seem to adapt and keep fighting well despite a non-functional limb. Not many chunin could do that. Mei mused, but ultimately shrugged. In the end, you are right however, we simply didn't see enough to warrant a promotion. A looked to the others. Are there any disagreements? Silence. A nodded. Uchiha Sasuke then, the amateur medic ninja. The Kazekage shrugged. He showed the usage of healing techniques and the chakra scalpel against both Omoe and Rock Lee, though his healing capabilities under Lee San's pressure seemed to melt away. As so eloquently pointed out by Reikage Dano. Rock Lee is a shit measuring stick. To be perfectly clear about what we all saw, those were 3 gates that Mado Guy's student opened. That would have given some jounin trouble to defeat cleanly. Hiruzen defended. Even so, the only thing that netted him the win was the luxury of being able to wait out Lee. The Kazekage stated, and Naruto got a sneaking suspicion that all the Kage knew that the poison wasn't Sasuke's idea, but they hadn't exactly worked out whose it was yet, or how it got there, hence why they were avoiding the subject. I am comfortable in giving him the vote however. As you said, Rock Lee was an exceptional circumstance. The boy was adequate. Sarutobi put in before the others, or more specifically Kitsuchi could speak. Mei nodded. I agree. If Naruto had been shaking in his boots before, he was practically vibrating with sheer giddiness now. Sakura and Sasuke were chunin. The only reason he didn't start bouncing off the walls was probably because Guy had noticed his excitement and was holding him with a rather firm grip in place. Sabaku no Gara and Hyuga Hinata. That giddy stupid smile on his face died rather quickly as the Kazekage's murderous gaze swiveled around and found him. Sound was the first thing Sasuke became aware of, muffled and distant, like someone was talking while he was underwater. Slowly, it got clearer and clearer as his mind became more and more aware and awake. It also helped him realize that he had an absolutely throbbing headache and the voices in the room were not helping. When the hell did you even set that up? During my fight with Kankuro. That smoke bomb didn't just hide me from him. It hid me from the audience and the proctors too. Perfect setup. You bitch, that's cheating. Stop laughing about it, Hinata. It's not funny. We're ninja. It's our job to cheat. He recognized the voices now. Tenten, Sakura. His sluggish thoughts took longer than he'd like to admit to recognize that Hinata was probably in the room too. He opened his eyes and groaned at the blindingly bright light filtering in through the window. Hey Sasuke. Sakura called from a bed he spied through squinting eyes, bandaged and smiling. So I give you a poison practically handcrafted to beat Likuin, and you still managed to get a concussion and pass out. Lee deserved the win in that fight. Tenten, sitting in a bed that must have been to his left, groused. Sasuke took another second to adjust himself to the absurdly bright light of the sun before he found himself comfortable enough to pan his eyes around the room. Sakura was across from him. Next to her, looking far too pleased with herself, was Hinata, sitting between Sakura and her cousin Niji, who Sasuke assumed was awake but just keeping his eyes closed, pretending to rest or trying his damnedest to be ignored in the conversation. To his left was Tenten and to his right was a still unconscious Lee, who was sleeping off the poison, mouth open and snoring, very, very loudly. Lee was fated to lose to Sasuke-san. Niji decided to chime in from his bed. Fated my ass! Tenten screamed. If Sakura wouldn't have been such a complete and utter bitch dash. Love you too, hun. Lee would have literally mopped the goddamn floor with Sasuke's skull. And fate decided things would play out this way instead. Niji drawled. Don't make me get up off this bed. I just got comfortable, and I swear I will rip your world a fucking sunder if you say one more word. Niji grunted, but kept quiet. Sasuke moved himself to sit up, though immediately his head swam and the nausea returned in full force. Concussion. Right. Waiting a second for his stomach to settle, he opened his eyes, finding other chunin hopefuls in the area. The place seemed to be communal, with somewhere around 30 beds available for the contestants. There weren't nearly that many for this tournament, so they had the luxury of leaving a few beds empty to act as a buffer zone between the groups. The Kiri team was the next one over, and after that he could spy Suna. With he guessed IWA all the way at the other end of the room with Kumogakure. The door nearest to them opened, and in walked Dash. Itachi? He croaked. Following behind her was the unmistakable 4-foot-nothing mop of red hair. "We brought food," Akane called, smiling over the stack of plastic boxes she was carrying in bags. His quiet, wraith-like sister tossed the smallest of smiles his way. "Concussed, nearly broke 2 ribs, and all from an opponent that was poisoned and tired from previous fights. For shame, Sasuke." She turned towards Sakura. "Thank you for helping him so much, Haruno." Any joy Sasuke might have felt at seeing his sister again quickly evaporated. "Don't you have anything better to do?" "It's Kumo." Itachi shrugged. "Not a tourist cruise," she said as if that explained everything, removing the heavy cloak around her shoulder to drape it over one arm and marching over towards the seat beside him that Sasuke only now realized was completely empty, sitting down and folding one leg over the other. Akane set the boxes of food down at a nearby end table, beginning to sort them out. "Eel." Tenten raised her hand. "Here. Sushi salmon?" Hinata raised her hand this time. And Sakura asked for Thias. She muttered to herself. Sasuke wondered just what they'd ordered for him when the door flew open again, revealing none other than Naruto, Kurenai and Guy, with Guy holding a collection of vests. Not enough for all of them, he quickly noted. "Hey guys!" Naruto cheered, craning his neck around and looking to Guy and Kurenai. "Can I tell em?" Mato Guy smiled, reaching for 2 vests and handing them to Naruto, and then handing one to Kurenai. The little blonde ball of energy seemed to teleport to both his teammates/students, all but shoving the vests into their chests, as Kurenai walked more sedately to Hinata and Guy towards Lee. Tenten decided to state the obvious. "So me and Niji failed, I take it." Guy smiled at the girl, though it was clearly a sad thing. Offering a nod, Konoha's green beast decided to explain. "While both of you showed skill in your chosen specialties, you showed little else. There was no exceptional strategy or adaptability to your circumstances. You fought each of your enemies on their terms even when it was clear you stood a good chance of losing if you continued doing so." Tenten huffed, taking a deep breath before falling back onto her pillow. "This sucks." Niji didn't say anything, looking at the vest at Lee's bedside like he could will the thing to burst into flames. "Neither of you are far from the goal," Guy tried to reassure. "You just need to widen your arsenal a bit." Tenten's eyes lit up. "I don't mean with actual weapons." Sasuke could tell that if anyone were to say Tenten was pouting right now, the girl would protest and say that the accuser was a filthy lying liar who lies. Sakura looked like she was feeling every individual fiber of the vest under her fingertips, her whole face lighting up with a smile. "So we made it?" she asked Naruto, clearly gesturing to herself and Sasuke. "Yup." The blonde laughed. "Your fight with Kankuro clutched it, so did Sasuke's fight with Omo. Yeah, because both of you got your asses thoroughly handed to you by Mr. I'll forfeit because I love Sakura so much." Tenten laughed. "He kicked more ass than you or Niji." Sakura shot back. The weapon mistress stuck her tongue out. "None of you should get overconfident because of this though," Kurenai warned, leaning on the wall beside Hinata. "Just because you made it to Chunin doesn't mean there weren't mistakes made." "She's right," Itachi agreed. "It was smart of you to recognize your trump card wasn't going to see you through the fight, Sakura, but hesitating and not using it against Lee was what cost you the fight because you wanted to save it for Sasuke, who you thought was a bigger threat." Sakura had the decency to look sheepish. "Sorry, Itachi-sensei." "And Sasuke?" she continued, turning her gaze towards him. "Even though Sakura gave you the poison, you thought that would be enough to secure you the win by itself, never believing Lee himself would have a trump card of his own. You walked away with a concussion. In a real fight you might not have walked away at all." Sasuke nodded, accepting the point. "So the poison was your idea?" Kurenai asked, surprised. "When did you even set it up?" "During the fight with Kankuro," she answered with a shrug. "First thing I did when I was inside the smoke bomb." "Clever." Guy nodded, also impressed. "Thanks." Before anything else could be said, however, the sounds of steady footsteps brought all of their eyes towards a steadily approaching Sabaka no Gara. The redhead didn't look much different, nor did he look angry or worn out. In fact, if they hadn't seen him fighting, none of them would have ever guessed he'd had a hair out of place just a short while ago. When he was close enough, he turned his head towards where Hinata was seated. "Hyuga-san," he said before bowing slightly at the waist. "Please accept my apologies for my behavior in the arena. I was not myself." Hinata raised a slender eyebrow, then slowly nodded. "She accepts." Tenten called, helping seeing as how the boy was still blindfolded. With a firm nod, Gaara turned his head, panning it over the assembled group before finally settling his sight on Naruto. You are Uzumaki-san. Yes? Naruto laughed, though it sounded a little nervous. Yup. That's me. Might I trouble you for a moment of your time? There's something I'd like to ask you. Not a problem. The blonde smiled happily, straightening his stance before walking up to the redhead as though he hadn't been the one to knock him the hell out in the ring. Once again, Gaara nodded in what seemed like thanks before doing an abrupt about-face back to where the Suna team was laying down in their hospital beds. He is way too trusting. Sakura muttered as he walked away, and to his surprise, Itachi let out a snort that sounded vaguely like laughter. Naruto walked behind Gaara, hands clasped behind his head. While certainly more calm, his old friend was as serious and stoic as ever. As such, he seemed to revel in silence, whereas Naruto found it just the faintest bit awkward and uncomfortable. Even so, he didn't really have much to break the ice with and start a conversation, so he grudgingly kept quiet and kept walking. Finally, they made it to where Kankuro and Temari were laying down in their beds. Kankuro's arm was wrapped up in an excessive amount of bandages, at least in Naruto's opinion, and with Temari he could see the bruises forming along the skin of her forearms, shins, and the underside of her jaw where Lee had clocked her once. So, Temari began, glaring at him. You're the asshole that cost my brother the exam. Gaara sighed. Well, he fucking did. She shot back. You're the strongest gen in here, and then he comes over and just dash. I don't care. Gaara shrugged. Be nice. Naruto smiled, scratching nervously at the back of his head. Well, I'm not sorry I did it, though I am sorry I had to. The Ichibi Jinchuriki nodded, stepping aside to take a seat beside his two siblings, sitting between them. What exactly is it that you did? He asked. And could you teach it to one of my siblings? Wait, what? Kankuro's head snapped over, blinking stupidly. What the he dash, it's necessary. Gaara interrupted. Every safeguard we put in place makes it that much harder for dash, Gaara. Temari warned, cutting him off. We don't really want to go blabbing about this to a total goddamn stranger. The youngest sibling shook his head. I'm guessing it's a little late, isn't that so, Uzumaki-san? Naruto shrugged. Yeah. I kinda know all about Shikaku. Konoha been spying on us or something? Temari accused. Aren't you supposed to be our allies? Naruto's laugh was sheepish. You, kinda can't really hide a Jinchuriki from me. I know all of them. He wasn't lying really. It seemed they bought it, though to be fair they didn't have a reason not to. Gaara turned his head, looking at him. Can you teach them? We don't need this. You don't need this. Temari insisted beside him. Naruto shrugged. Anyone can learn it with enough time. But I don't think we have that since we'll all be heading home soon. How much time? The blonde shrugged. 4 months. Maybe 6. Sealing isn't exactly a quick study for most people. Gaara rubbed at his chin, becoming thoughtful. I see, irritating. Naruto looked back over his shoulder, towards his Konoha friend, and was half tempted to go back and celebrate with Sakura and Sasuke over their promotion, but he'd been away from these old friends for far too long. It was time he learned a bit more about their lives here and how many things had changed, as well as what stayed the same. None too subtly grabbing one of the nearby chairs and dragging it across the floor to sit closer, he smiled as he plopped himself down on his acquired seat. I don't think we've been properly introduced. He grinned. My name's Uzumaki Naruto, what are yours? In another part of the city, Magajiro Kuta released a plume of gray smoke from his lips, savoring the taste as he waited for his tea to cool just a bit. The door opened, and in walked the 3 most legendary of Konoha's current ninja. Kuta looked at the 3 from where he sat, a strange sort of smile that was not really a smile on his face. We are set then? Hiruzen offered a single nod. The Chunin examination results have been determined. And all of our other arrangements? Seem to. Orochimaru answered, arms crossed. This is a rather big gamble you're banking on, Magajiro. Tsunade warned. If it doesn't work, we'll be at a much greater disadvantage. We'll have to hope I'm dash. He smirked. That IWA is only half as clever as we are. He took a drink of his tea, the warm liquid vanishing from the tiny cup. When is it that we leave? 2 days' time. The daimyo turned to Hiruzen. Will our honorable allies from Suna be joining us? That has yet to be determined. If they do, will they stay loyal? Orochimaru's smile widened a bit in response, eyes shifting to the back of Sarutobi's head. Sensei and I have discussed contingencies. They'll stay in line. Tsunade shook her head. I don't want to know. No need to get squeamish, Haim. Enough. Sarutobi declared, voice firm and strong, looking to his daimyo. We're ready. He declared with a sense of finality. We'll follow your plan, and hopefully secure one more solid victory to completely destroy any morale IWA might have left. Kuta nodded, serving himself another cup of tea and rose it in mock toast. To victory then. Chapter 61. Hope you have a safe trip. Naruto's voice was all light, and his face held a bright smile to go along with it as he looked up at the still taller form of Haku. I hope the same for you. The raven-haired Yuki Kunoichi said, smiling softly. The high mountain breeze caught her hair, sending it into her face. She closed one eye and tried to brush it back into place. Haku-san. Someone called, one of the jounin, a tall, thin man with an almost flushed complexion that would give the impression of someone with a cold, or maybe someone that stayed just a tad too long out in the sun. The surplus rations, who was assigned to their storage? Kazuri. She called back. You sure? Pretty sure. If not him, then check with Hidetaka. The man nodded and moved to leave. Before their impromptu goodbyes could continue, however, both ninjas spotted the approaching figures of Hiruzen, Kutu and Mei making their way closer to the area, with the three apparently wrapped in their own conversation. Naruto tried to read them, get a feel for how exactly it was going, so to speak, but Mei's smile was all diplomacy, soft edges and attentiveness, not the half-hooded smirk he knew would indicate her to be truly pleased or the tightened features of subtle displeasure. Similarly, Hiruzen's face was a mask of inscrutable aloofness, breathing out gray smoke with little more than a half-amused quirk of the lips that told the world he knew something they didn't, and Kuti utilized his signature method of exaggerated laughs and beaming smiles to always appear pleased with everyone. He knew each of them well enough to know they were each on guard still. They came to a stop, none of them bowed as they said their farewells. Mei extended her hand, shaking theirs, and that was the extent of the goodbye, with the beautiful Mizukage turning away to march back to the troop of men and women that were still preparing for the return journey as Kuta turned and called for his horse, Hiruzen moving towards Orochimaru and Tsunade, who were near the gate apparently talking with Raman, the head of Kuta's guard. He wasn't the only one that had been watching. When he turned back to Haku, she'd been looking at them too. She turned to him, smiling thinly, a somber glint in those light eyes. I also hope that when we meet next time. She trailed off, and he offered a shrug. Like I said, no matter what happens, we'll still be friends. She let out something that approximated a sigh through her nostrils, huffing once before she leaned down and pressed a kiss to his cheek. You're sweet, Naruto-kun. I hope you always stay that way, she said. Haku-chan. Mei called to them. They'd caught her eye, it seems. Come here, love, we have a lot to do. She tilted her head, eyeing him. Hope you don't mind me stealing her back, Naruto-kun. She remembered his name. With Mei, that wasn't always a good thing. He smiled back at her, feeling Haku's fingers squeeze at his shoulder, and one last quiet goodbye before she went back to the Kiri-nin, and he turned to head back to the Konoha group. Far out of sight of the gathering of the village guests as they prepared to leave the village, he stood at the balcony door of his office looking out to the mountains. Behind him were his village's most powerful shinobi, next to himself, his sister Kiribi and her fellow Jinchuriki Yujito. Alright, so they're leaving and nothing blew up. Yet. Yujito corrected the taller woman. Nothing has blown up yet. It could practically feel Bee rolling her eyes. What's the plan now, bro? I say we side with IWA, Yujito chimed in. A turned to find the blonde woman examining her nails, languishing on the couch at the side of his office, one hand behind her head. We've been building up our military for years to fight. This looks like it's setting up to be a big damn fight. IWA is losing. Pointed out. And if they lose, Konoha will probably gain a lot in terms of money with spoils alone. She was telling him what he already knew, of course. That, by itself, will put them back on top of the food chain, if not in manpower then at least in economy. I don't know. Seems to me like we should just stay out of it. Bee pointed out. The fact that she wasn't rhyming told her that she understood the gravity of this next decision in its entirety. IWA and Konoha pick this fight, let them end it. And if Konoha gets money out of it, whatever. I'm inclined to agree. A interrupted. Ultimately, however, that decision will be made in the next few days. What's gonna happen in a few days? Yujito asked. IWA has set up an ambush. He answered. They will attack Konoha with aimed forces on the return journey. That's... A shrugged. Breaking the treaty? Logistically difficult, if not impossible? Desperate? All those things. Why didn't you call them out on it, bro? Kirby asked, sitting a bit more forward. My threats against them were to ensure the peace would hold within the village walls and within our borders. He answered. What plans they make for actions outside my borders is not my problem. Until I decide to get involved, either side will be hindered or helped by me. If Konoha foolishly marches into this ambush, they are incompetent. If IWA fails in their attack, they are worthless. You're gonna side with whoever wins. A look to Yujito. To correct your previous statement, Yujito. I did not build our armies to fight. I built our armies to win. I have no intention of backing the losing side. The hike down the mountains was almost as bad as the hike up the mountains. The months-long stay had driven away the last vestiges of summer, and now autumn was in full swing, with all of its cold and stormy weather. Which was probably making Aim's job gathering those massive rain clouds ahead of them all the easier, now that Naruto cared to look. Jagged rocks and loose gravel were their enemies down the mountain, while horses and supply wagons that had to negotiate past them were even worse. Kiri had already pulled ahead of them, as Mei hadn't come here with her daimyo. Neither had Sunagekure, but they were scheduled to leave a bit later in the day from what he'd gathered. Sakura, Sasuke, Lee and Hinata were each sporting their own vests as they walked, and already Naruto could see the subtle differences in each piece as they manipulated the symbol of rank to more easily incorporate itself into their fighting styles. Sakura's vest was thinner. She'd removed some of the heavier armor pieces woven between the layers of fabric, the front and side of the vest cut to allow her an easier time twisting and bending her body for the taijutsu style she favored of quick strikes and dodging rather than blocking and exchanging heavy blows. The pockets were lined with an assortment of tools like ninja wire, smoke bombs, and the gear necessary to lay down a quick trap. Lee's was almost the opposite. If Naruto were to guess, he'd stuffed weights into the vest, similar to those on his legs. They would double as heavy armor plates. Sasuke and Hinata had done the least work to their vests, with only the weave of the shoulders having been altered in Hinata's to allow her much more freedom of movement along the arms. Her entire fighting style revolved around the use of her hands. Freedom of movement was paramount. Sasuke hadn't done much to his really, in fact, he would almost say no changes had been made if it wasn't for the field surgeon knives he'd made a custom holster for at the side of the vest. The genin's easy smiles and jovial talks were a stark contrast to the ninja of higher rank, all of whom had been briefed about what exactly was waiting for them up ahead and kept their conversations relatively subdued by comparison. Not tense, not quiet, not yet. They were still a day or so's march minimum from where they expected the ambush to take place, but the unease was there if you knew what signs to look for. The tension in their hands, just waiting to reach for a weapon, the swiveling heads that moved to and fro looking for some stray movement or wandering shadow, the way they sat with their backs to a hard surface and the short rests they took as they waited for the carriages to negotiate their way through some of the rougher terrain. Naruto-sensei. Akane's voice brought him out of his wandering thoughts, his attention turning back to her. When's the next Chunin exam? The red-headed girl asked. I can't let Sasuke and Sakura-chan get too far ahead. He felt his lips quirking into a smile, remembering those words running through his own mind when he'd entered the exam to start with. Oh sure, he covered it up with blusterity and bluster, but he had been nervous as hell. And after it was done, well, he was glad this exam experience had left her with enthusiasm for the next one. 6 months, he answered, smiling as he ruffled her hair, much to her frustration as she tried to push his hand away. Don't worry, Ayer. He paused, realizing that his next words of having not made it to Chunin at all weren't true in this life. He made it to the rank quite early and handily, in fact. I know of a guy that was really strong but didn't make it to Chunin until he was almost 20. She scrunched up her nose. I'd rather get to Chunin now. He laughed, though it was rather short-lived as he received a smack to the back of the head. What was that for? He questioned, and received a pointed look and a raised eyebrow in return as if to say you know exactly what that was for. He frowned at the back of her head, squinting angrily at the black hair. Stupid slip-ups and time travel confusion. Stupid Uchiha's. Several miles to the north, the column of men from Tsuchi no Kuni was barely out of view from Kumogakure before the entire march was brought to a halt. Samurai dismounted from their horses, supply wagons opened, cumbersome armor removed and stuffed into the wagons revealed to be empty as the men that wore them donned different gear fit for shinobi rather than normal men. The daimyo looked to Katsuchi, who dismounted the horse and removed the traditional, ceremonial robes of the kage, instead conning his own custom umbu armor. The older man nodded to Inoki's successor. Do whatever you have to. Pay them back tenfold. Katsuchi didn't answer in words, only offered a single resolute nod. Turning to the ranks of his ninja, which had now swelled to nearly double their previous number, as the daimyo's samurai guard shrank to just 4 men. He panned his eyes over the group, with some still strapping on bits of armor or weapon holsters, and found Kuratsuchi's distinct eyes in the crowd, their gazes meeting. What he wouldn't give to be her father right now, and not her commander. Was this how his own father felt? But those were thoughts for another day, after this was done. He raised his hand, the universal signals clear for the men to read. Pursue and destroy. The rain had turned the earth into a marsh. Ankle-deep muck and ice-slick mud had turned the wagons into an impossibility. One horse had already broken a leg from a bad fall and had to be put down, others were getting stuck, and on the second day they'd barely moved even a quarter of the distance they'd originally planned. The tension was starting to get to the men. The shinobi in particular. The samurai guard were tired and weary, but the shinobi knew that the enemy was stacking the deck even further in their favor, exhausting them before they ever raised up a single hand to fight. Naruto himself was devoting plenty of his own chakra into a small army of shadow clones to help. Even with storage scrolls helping men in 40+ pounds of armor through the equivalent of a tar pit, where there was no shortage of opportunities to get stuck, was wearing down even on his massive reserves. Despite the circumstances, Kutu insisted that they pressed on, with an unerring tenacity that bordered on the insane. By the time they made it to where they had to fight, he doubted there would be much of a force left. Kuta had to know this. What was he planning? The answer didn't come to him that day, or the day after that. When they reached the flooded, bloated body of the Hasegawa River, the largest river on the map, the one that Itachi had pointed out would give them the most trouble, still 1 day away from where they expected the ambush to be. That's when he got his answer. They were standing at the water's edge, with a river so wide you could barely even see the other side through the downpour, feet digging into mulched earth as bits and pieces of dirt and rock were ripped up at the river's edge and carried downstream. How are we going to cross? He heard Sakura ask, her eyes on a map that was being kept dry by the way of Lee and Kiba holding massive straw umbrellas that some of them had made the first day. Even the normal fords are hours away on foot, in normal weather. Why'd we come here? Now that was the question, wasn't it? Why had they come here? Naruto looked to Kutu, still sitting astride the beast of a horse that was his personal mount, the heavy cloak hiding his wood armor and red and black robes. Apparently, one of the samurai guards was also curious, or perhaps his patience had been worn thin by 3 days of rain. Kuto-sama dash. The daimyo raised a hand, silencing the man with a gesture. I'm listening to the rain, Katsui. The man seemed to be trying to fish for words, or at least the courage to speak up, but he didn't in the end, deflating with a sag of his shoulders as he waited beside his daimyo in silence. They stood there, for an hour. Soon enough, the groups began to disperse, with small shelters being erected and fires springing up to warm them from the freezing rains. They were starting to wonder if this was going to be a permanent camp for the rest of the day, and if they should start building it as such when, finally, Kutu's insanity revealed the reason behind the madness. A ship. The thing was huge, too big for a river, but this river was flooded. The galley pulled up close as it could, 2 anchors descending to bring it to a stop so as not to be pulled with the current. The captain stood on the deck, a thin older man, with silver hair. Magajiro-sama! He shouted. The daimyo grunted. There were supposed to be 3. He finally shouted back, his voice carrying over the oppressing rain. I'm impressed. Naruto heard Itachi whisper beside him, too low for the genin to overhear. He turned, looking at her out of the corner of his eye to indicate he was listening. The whole linchpin of the enemy's plan is to flood the area, so we have to enter a route where they can ambush us, using the very linchpin of the plan itself, the flood, to facilitate an escape by galley isn't something I'd have thought of. She shrugged. It's impressive. Move your enemy. Do not be moved by him. It was the entire doctrine behind how Kuta viewed a conflict. He had to admit, she was right. It was impressive the way his mind bent and twisted around problems. It seems that not everything had gone according to plan, however. The storms out to sea have delayed the others, the captain hollered back. I almost didn't make it myself, my lord. How much room do you have? Enough for 20, nothing more. Naruto winced. 20. Kutu's men alone were nearly a dozen. Add Kutu himself, that only left 7 spots. Hiruzen, Orochimaru, Tsunade. Kutu barked, summoning the 3 shinobi to no doubt work out how they were going to improvise now that Plan A was only half working. Though he ordered them, Kutu at least had the decency to dismount in order to speak with the 3, huddling together at the edge of the flooded river. There were no raised voices, no visible anger or tensions. Naruto watched, and each of the 4 looked perfectly calm, composed, talking for minutes on end. By the time they were finished, the boat had already sent out 3 small skiffs, the oarsmen on the 3 struggling to row through the current and land close to the river's edge themselves, pulling the small ships ashore with help from the samurai, genin and other shinobi as soon as they reached them. When they finished, the 4 of them broke the impromptu meeting, and Kutu's eyes panned the assembled group as Sarutobi took Orochimaru aside. It seems a decision had been made. Chapter 62. Part 1. The rain never let up, not for a moment, and night, with visibility dropping even further, only made it all the more oppressive with the constant hiss and the black clouds pouring down an ocean of water. The lights on the galley flickered and sputtered as the wind howled. From the edges of the flooded river one could only make out the fact that they existed at all by the lack of light from anywhere else. Even the moon was blocked out by the blackness overhead. But the galley was not as full as it could have been. 5 genin and 4 chunin were aboard, along with Orochimaru as the ninja forced to accompany Magajiro Kutu. And that was all. Out of the 20 available spaces aboard the ship, only 11 were filled, barely more than half. The current was strong and swift. Kutu could feel it rising up from below decks, thrumming through his body where he sat. This was not the open ocean, the waves did not rock the vessel violently, but the crew above deck was still holding the vigil for rocks or debris. The constant drumming of droplets the size of rocks striking the wood all around him combined into a claustrophobic cacophony that could just barely drown out the noise of wood creaking and ropes groaning. It was unnerving. He sat with a tray of food before him, a modest meal of rice, fried fish, and steamed vegetables. The best the crew could afford to give, no doubt. Orochimaru knelt beside him. The genin and child shunin he'd taken with him aboard were present, and eating as well. Conversation was subdued, non-existent really. They had questioned why they were splitting up, and had received their answers. They now knew that while they were safe aboard with him, it was very likely that they might not ever see their sensei and loved ones again by the time they reached safe harbor. The chunin, more than any of the others of course, protested, so confident with their new promotions. Rock Lee had not wished to leave his sensei. The entirety of Team 7, with not only their sensei, but also direct family, walking to danger, had protested and howled, demanding to be allowed to fight. Only Hyuga Hinata had kept her composure, her face becoming a mask of cold, contemptuous anger that she displayed at the orders, but grit her teeth and followed them without much more than the steely glare she used to make her Inuzuka teammate fall quietly into line. Kutu knew that she would go very far if she kept that up. And still, ropes groaned and strained, wood creaked and bent. Kutu opened his eye to see the tea steaming in his cup. The liquid tilted ever so much in its confines, its weight shifting with the movement of the ship. Orochimaru did not say a word, did not even look up from his food as he ate politely and quietly. This rain had turned the earth into little more than a marsh, the unsteady footing demanding that even walking on it at all safely required chakra. Not enough to compare to water walking, but the fact that it needed it at all spoke volumes to how much water had been dumped on this land in preparation for the attack. They would have long since taken to the trees, but Konoha's trees were nowhere in sight. They were still within the rolling hills, valleys and plains of Kumogakure's borderlands. The river was long behind them, the samurai too. They had split up 3 groups, 3 targets to pursue. Sarutobi had ordered them all to exercise stealth, but Naruto was noticing that here and there people were leaving a trail. Nothing obvious, and not everyone at once, only the higher-ranking ninja in the group, Hiruzen himself, Tsunade, and even Itachi he'd caught once out of the corner of his eye releasing just a little bit more chakra than necessary in her run, no doubt leaving an obvious imprint that, while the rain may wash away, a sensor would be able to detect easily. It didn't take him long to realize that, despite his orders, and the appearance to the contrary, Hiruzen was using himself, and this group, as bait. Something for the enemy to chase to keep them from looking elsewhere. The boat was the obvious answer. If IWA caught wind of the escaped vessel too soon, they could very easily attack it while it was still floating along the flooded riverbanks, close enough to shore to just be able to rush across the water with chakra. The samurai column was another distraction then, or at least, it was the only conclusion he could come up with. 24 armored men on horseback, with weapons and bright red armor would be noticed easily, and tracked even easier. Had Kutu and Sarutobi thrown them to the proverbial wolves to die, they were soldiers, like all of them, they knew the risks and they knew their duty. But the thoughts still left him feeling cold. Their own march through these flooded plains was something Naruto found almost wholly new in his pool of experience if he were honest. The tall forests of Kanehigakure was easy, tall trees, thickets of foliage, they could hide a man well. The few times he'd ventured into Suna, and learned the intricacies of desert warfare, using genjutsu, minor earth ninjutsu, or even the desert's own heat mirages to hide your presence was something he could understand. But this, a flat grass plain, even with the rain he felt exposed, like eyes were on him from all directions, it was unnerving. Sarutobi had ordered them to spread out, teams of 2, they kept in contact through the use of Tsunade's slugs, the little creatures on their shoulders, whispering in their ears, nudging them in directions in a seemingly random, zigzagging pattern that Naruto, frankly couldn't make heads or tails of, but would have them rendezvous every hour on the hour. He wasn't sure if this was to confuse a tracking team, make it easier for them to pick up the trail, or even to scout. If 2 people were attacked, it could be used to warn the entirety of the battle group of where the enemy was. He was cold, he was miserable, and even with all his experience the tension was beginning to get to him when Itachi, his partner, because he wouldn't prefer anyone else to be at his back right now, tapped him on the shoulder, the slug on hers having apparently given them a message. She spoke in sign language, no words, no sound but the hiss of the rain. Shelter. 4 kilometers, south by southeast. He made a sign back at her. Rendezvous, she shook her head. No rendezvous. Setting up camps with everyone still separated. Safer for the battle group as a whole, more dangerous for the individual teams. He took a deep breath, hearing the roll of thunder above, feeling it in his chest. Itachi moved, using minor genjutsu to make herself all the harder to see. Even for him, barely 3 feet away he would sometimes lose track of her. He hoped he wasn't making her efforts useless with his own lack of skill in the art. Or worse, tiring her out because she was putting some kind of illusionary shroud over him too. The wind felt like an ice-cold knife, cutting them down to the bone, even through the thick traveling cloak. The shelter the slug had spoken about was a collection of rather large boulders, 2 of them arranged such that one was leaning over the other, offering just enough room underneath the 2 massive stones to huddle beneath. They looked to each other, offering quick nods and set to work. Their traveling cloaks were taken off, the large cloths doubling now as makeshift tent fabric. He summoned some more from a storage scroll, using wind chakra to drive kunai knives into the rock over their heads and hanging the dark cloths with the length of rope from the rings of the weapons, providing a shield from the worst of the wind and rain. Itachi, similarly, had managed to seal off her side of the makeshift shelter. Naruto risked a bit of chakra, just enough to form a pit in the ground, about the size of his 2 fists, and Itachi used another small bit of it to burn some kindling with a burst of flame from her lips, placing it in the hole so the light wouldn't reach too far. A flame was dangerous, but most people didn't share his physiology. As a former Jinchuriki who still held a rather strong healing factor, and while she was rarely in that category, Itachi was part of most people in this case. She was suppressing it, but he could see her shivers. Her shoulders and hands shaking ever so slightly as she held her fingers close to the fire. The stone and thick cloths would trap the heat in here, insulating it. Hopefully, in a few hours their clothes would be a bit drier, and their bodies a bit warmer. He felt a spatter of rain fall on him from above as the wind shifted direction. He reached over and tested his handiwork, trying to make sure there were as few weak spots as possible. There weren't any, the rain was just coming down that hard. He sighed, and turned back to find Itachi already breaking a ration bar to share. Naruto pulled out a small tin cup from his own pack, inching it out past the shield of cloth around them until he heard the clink-clinks of water hitting it, pulling back his hand to give it a minute or so to fill up as he took the ration bar with the other. The rations tasted as they usually did, dry like bone meal and flat as all hell, almost stale, but he could almost feel the specialized mix going straight through his body, what little chakra he'd used already refilling like a watered-down soldier pill as his hunger ebbed away. He forced it down, knowing it would be worse if he tried to wash it with intermittent gulps of water. Itachi did the same, and when they were both done he reached for the tin cup, finding it full enough to slosh over the rim and into his hand before he offered her the first drink. She nodded in thanks, gulping it down almost in one swing. He slid the cup outside again as he watched Itachi still trying to suppress her shivers. Not for the first time, he missed Kurama. The Kyuubi's chakra was unbearably hot, and even a split second of its use to give her the faintest bit would have all but eliminated the chill from her bones. As it was, all he could settle on was reaching forward, his hands grasping onto hers. They were still larger than his, her skin was ice cold to the touch, and his was probably burning hot to her. He lowered their hands onto the fire, close enough for it to hurt him a little bit. They sat there like that for minutes, and managed to share another 3 drinks of cold rainwater before he finally noticed her shivers subsiding and the inside of their improvised shelter rise to a safe temperature again. She looked at him, pulling her hands free enough to ask. First or second watch? First, was his immediate answer. He could run on less sleep than most, and his stamina wouldn't suffer for it. She nodded, onyx eyes looking just the faintest bit relieved, mouthing a quiet thank you before she settled onto her side to catch some much-needed rest. Her dinner was cold. Akane sat at her place, forcing down mouthfuls of food that tasted like ash on her tongue as her stomach twisted and churned with quiet worry and dread. The others around her were little better. The Inuzuka had tried to fill the silence with a conversation, as had Tenten-san, but their efforts soon died away, everyone's thoughts moving to their sensei and for Akane, her mother as well, listening to the pitter-pats of rain on the wood around them. She hated it, and what she hated even more than that was the feeling of, almost betrayal really. Their sensei, all of them, knew this was coming for weeks and no one had told any of them. Naruto-sensei's lessons, the look in his eye, sad but determined that he thought she didn't notice when he thought she wasn't looking, trying for her to access Goku-san's power and still be in control of herself while also harnessing the innate physical enhancements that her Tenin had given her. All of this pushing and trying with days and days of exhaustion, even for her, and none of them ever thought to tell them what they were preparing for. So yes, to say the least, her feelings were mixed. She always learned in the academy that sometimes someone with a higher rank had to keep secrets, but she hadn't expected it from Naruto-sensei, or Roki-chan, or even Sarajiji, and least of all her own mother. She was angry at them, but more than that she was worried because even after all of sensei's training she wasn't there to help. She could help. Jinchuriki like her were supposed to be some of the strongest ninja in the world. That's why there were only 8 others like her. They should have let her help. There was a sound, footsteps pounding on the floorboards, someone running towards them. All eyes turned to the doorway before it opened, the sound clear and audible through the thin wood before it was flung open, the candlelights of the deck hall shining through and letting them see the captain of the ship clearly, blood dripping from his head, one red-stained arm clutched to his chest. Magajiro-sam dash. Then there was a knife jutting out of his neck. There was a scream, she wasn't sure from who, it may have been from her. The genin rushed to their feet, so did Roki, standing protectively in front Kurama as the captain gurgled on his own blood, his body stiffening, going ramrod straight as he took 1 step, 2 and toppled over, dead, a pool of blood forming beneath him as dark-clothed figures entered the room. Akane felt Sakura grab her, pulling her back to the others as the young Senju counted. 3, 4, 5, 6. Then the 7th walked in, and she recognized him. The Tsuchikage stood at the door, a sneer curling his lip, the candlelight casting long, dark shadows across his face. It's time that you pay for your crimes, Magajiro Kutu. Akane felt Sakura's hands on her shoulders, her teammates stepping around her to try and stand in front of her. She looked across the room to Sasuke, who stood beside Hinata, finding a naked fear on his face that was mirrored by all her other friends. The daimyo of Haino Kuni let out a puff of air to cool his steaming tea. Naruto's eyes snapped over as Itachi's own snapped open. She sat up, dark eyes almost lost in the dim embers of the fire before both of them found Tsunade's slug. The creature was on the stone that served as their shelter, the intermittent pulses of chakra, too faint for anyone more than a few feet away to pick up, serving as a coded language. One of the teams, North, found dead, enemy force split into 3 divisions, searching, fanning out. Orders, converge around 1, attack, wipe it out before full force can regroup. Neither of them needed further explanation, they moved without another second's hesitation, gathering everything and sealing it away in less than 60 seconds. Their soaked traveling cloaks were soaked through and through, the spares held in the scroll were thrown over their shoulders before they ripped down the makeshift shelter and rushed out, leaving the cloths there. No point in gathering them. Either they'd be safe enough to not need the makeshift setup in a few hours, or they'd be dead. Kamizuri Kitsuchi had faced many enemies, from Chunin to Jounin to the highest ranked Umbu. He had almost 20 years of diligent service for his village and was recognized as one of the strongest, even before his ascension to Kage at his father's death. All that time and combat experience gave him many advantages, one of them being a finely honed, innate sense for danger, a natural wariness and caution that told him when he was stepping into something that was a bit more than he could easily handle. Magajiro Kutu, right now, was a man that was giving him those feelings. He scanned the faces of the genin and freshly promoted Chunin the daimyo had taken aboard with him, studying each. They looked surprised, afraid even, but Orochimaru himself, the greatest threat here, did not, though either did he sport the cruel, wicked smile he always did, so perhaps he too was surprised. But Kutu was not. The man sat in front of his tea set, seemingly bored with the world around him. He could be acting, but Kitsuchi was confident that he would have picked up something, some small tell or oddity to his body language if he were acting. Either he wasn't as good as he thought, Kutu was a very good actor, or the man was genuinely unconcerned. The Kage of Iwagakure stepped forward, marching past the dead body of the ship captain. "Would you like to join me for tea, Kamizuri Dano?" The ruler's smooth voice rolled off his tongue like polished wood, deep and steady. "I would like for you to cease your games," he answered, fingering the hilt of a kunai blade hidden in his sleeve. Kutu's eyes opened, fixing him with a hard stare that rooted the Tsuchikage in place. Killing intent, so powerful and concentrated that it could only ever be one man behind it. Kutu's hand moved lightning quick in a seal too fast even for most common jounin, and Kitsuchi's fears were cemented. The door at their back shut with a slam of wood, a seal pattern burning itself into the panels, the whole room warping and twisting before their very eyes, the windows vanishing as the same structure seemed to stretch impossibly wide even as Kutu's still kneeling form and the table in front of him warped closer, bringing the man within striking distance in an instant. Kitsuchi didn't look at the man, didn't look at the table, instinct and training taking over. He raised his hand, blade ready, and struck out at seemingly empty air. There was a clang of steel against steel, his weapon pressing firmly against something it couldn't pierce. Magajiro Kutu raised a hand in mock toast, his last act before slowly disintegrating into wispy black smoke and ash, the rough, gravel voice of someone else entirely speaking now as legs, torso, arm, and face became visible. "You react well," Sarutobi Hiruzen commended, eyes staring into Kitsuchi's own, forearm bracer holding fast against the edge of Kitsuchi's kunai blade. "But your father would never have walked into so obvious a trap." He heard the men unsheathe their weapons behind him, ready to come to his defense. He heard another sound, a seventh. Something that shouldn't be dash. The cap dash! His warning was too late. Springing up from the ground, the corpse of the captain lashed out at the two nearest men. One avoided the attack, the other did not. With a gurgle of blood, arterial spray gushed from the man's neck, bathing the room, and the now standing captain in red. The same wispy trail of black smoke signaled the illusion melting away. To the side, camouflage cloth and their respective genjutsu fell away, revealing more Konoha shinobi, two kunoichi. Kitsuchi dared a glance behind him. The man looked over his shoulder. He recognized them all. Kyofa and Ryoko, Orochimaru's most famous pupils, and the blood wolf of Kanehigakure himself, Hatake Kakashi. Konoha's top Umbu rolled his neck, cracking it with pops and snaps, silver hair matted down from the rain, black mask dripping watery blood as he, Kyofu and Ryoko stood between Kitsuchi and the five Umbu at the door. Kitsuchi stole a glance over Sarutobi's shoulder. Orochimaru himself was not, in fact, Orochimaru, but a samurai devoid of his armor, wearing only the barest hint of protection in forearm braces, shin guards and a curia, his two swords at his side. That was one bit of good news. 4 to 6 were odds he would risk dash. Foolish. His gaze snapped down to Hiruzen. The old man was staring up at him, shorter by almost a full head, Kitsuchi realized. "What?" he asked, despite himself. "Your hope," the old man drawled, making the younger Kage feel very, very cold. The edges of the room turned black, and Kitsuchi noticed a new seal at their feet, tendrils of oily shadow spilling in from the walls, cutting him off from sight of all, except the damning eyes of Hiruzen, leaving only the two of them standing in the darkness. He tried to dispel the illusion. When that didn't work, he tried to break the seal at their feet, stomping down with a burst of chakra. It did not work either. "It is," the old man smiled at him, "foolish." As all shinobi battles, there was no warning for its beginning. One moment all that could be seen or heard was the blackness of the night, the constant, cold droplets striking their bodies, the freezing wind and the ever-present hiss of the rain. In the next, the night was cut through with battle cries, screams of wounded, bursts of chakra, the sharp, blinding light of ninjutsu techniques, and the tang of blood for those sensitive enough to smell it. They were farther when it started, close enough to hear, but not close enough to participate. They turned and weaved through the tall grass, making their way close to where they could sense the bursts of chakra, and hear the clang of metal striking metal. Like a flare, others sent out their own bursts of chakra, signaling for help, and it was answered in turn, far, but not too far, for 6 minutes at best before the closest group arrived with reinforcements. How many did they have? A dozen? 2 dozen? Their strength here was a limited thing, even with Sarajiji and Tsunade here. 2 of the 5 guardians, the Hokage's personal Umbu guard, Itachi and the Jounin sensei. Elites all, but too many enemy numbers will bring them down just the same. Then there was no time left to think, no time to worry. He and Itachi came out of the grass, weapons in hand, in time to see a man in a Chunin vest turn, the Awagakure forehead protector glinting in the dark. He was dead before he hit the ground, and Naruto wasn't sure which one of them delivered the killing blow faster. He looked to her, and she to him in the dark, nodding once in quiet understanding before she vanished from his sight, the genjutsu removing her from all senses as he rushed headlong into the fray, where he could already see guys standing back to back with one of the Hokage's Umbu. Someone saw him, moved to stop him. Another Chunin, older, probably late 30s, who didn't call for backup, probably thinking that the little boy in front of him was a genin or a fresh promotion. The man threw the kunai in his hand, aiming dead center at Naruto's forehead. Naruto ducked, the blade passing him by inches as he spun, hand reaching out to catch the weapon and use its own power to redirect and throw it back at its owner. The man's face registered surprise before the blade lodged itself in his throat and he fell flat on his back. The seal came easily, and 6 shadow clones appeared around him, splitting up in pairs of 2. He spied Guy through the dark again, and saw, in this moment, what had given him the name. Konoha's green beast. He fought like one. Gone was the cheerful, easy smile, gone was the simple attitude and over-the-top personality. Guy's face was a rictus of controlled rage, his lips pulled back in a savage snarl, hands moving lightning fast against anything that came even remotely close, snapping limbs and necks, sounding like a beast that was tearing the bones of its victim. He didn't see Tsunade, but he felt her, the ripple of her chakra like a beacon in the night. He didn't feel Sarajiji's. Katsuchi felt his features tighten, the anger as he stared this man down making his lip curl ever so slightly. Hiruzen's face, by contrast, seemed to be carved out of stone. A half-lidded, almost bored gaze of a grandfather staring at an uppity child that just did not know his place in the family hierarchy. The room around them had vanished. There was nothing in their surroundings save infinite, inky blackness, no sound, or even the vibrations of air from the fight that must have been going on nearby could be perceived here. Sarutobi's arm was still up, forearm bracer grinding against the kunai blade in Katsuchi's hand. With a shift of his grip, Katsuchi redirected the blade, sliding it across the brace to try and jab at Hiruzen's collarbone only for the old man to simply move. He slid away, using the same defensive measure to step into Katsuchi's own guard, striking with fists that were lightning fast even to a man a third his age, the chakra shrouding his clenched knuckles brushing close enough to Katsuchi's flesh that he could feel the tingle of static on his skin as he backpedaled and blocked, gaining some distance. Hiruzen's stance was wide, all but standing on the balls of his feet. He recognized the stance, an old, almost archaic taijutsu that focused on upper body strength and footwork. He'd never witnessed it in use before. His hands moved into seals, the crackling of lightning flashing between the 2 men, even as the darkness swallowed the glow. With a grunt, the snapping forks of energy launched themselves at the old man, who formed his own seals in turn, an unseen wind forming a wall in front of the aged Kage, stopping the lightning inches short of his bored features. Anoki would have been strong enough to force me to move. His smile was a cruel thing, twisting in Katsuchi's gut like a knife. The Tsuchikage didn't answer, refusing to take the bait. Hiruzen's eyes widened by a fraction, his body moving like a coiled snake, ducking under the kunai blade that would have punched through the back of his skull. His hand rose, looking to seize the offending limb only for it to suddenly be yanked back into its place at his side, a chain with a weight at the end holding the limb in place, the same thing occurring to his other arm. 2 clones were at the end of the chains, pulling them taut, not allowing the man to move. Kitsuchi himself lunged forward, another blade in his hand, aiming to run the old bastard straight through the heart. The old Kage's lips thinned, frowning in what seemed like irritation. Grasping onto the chains, a burst of lightning destroyed the two clones in puffs of gray smoke, as his head shoved backwards, headbutting the clone behind him with a crunch of bone that dispelled it as well. The Hokage's hands moved lightning quick, gripping onto Kitsuchi's wrist and forearm, stopping the blade just centimeters from his chest. Kitsuchi's fingers flicked it with all the strength he could put into his digits. The blade shoved itself inches into Hiruzen's chest. The old man's body became translucent, losing form and definition, and Kitsuchi was suddenly splashed with water. A water clone. Then he looked, noticing the kunai blade that still brushed against his fingers, piercing a seal tag that looked like an explosive note, with a sound not unlike a live wire, and a smell of ozone. The soaked Setsukage suddenly found himself on the receiving end of some kind of custom-made seal, electricity, rather than fire, bursting out of the tag like a bleeding wound, running up the metal blade and straight into his body, launching him flat onto his back, pain racking up and down his limbs as his fingers twitched and his form shook. A water clone. He thought with something akin to anger, as he forced himself back to his feet, biting down the grunt of pain stuck in his throat. Do you know why I have remained a Kage for half a century, child? He turned, looking at the old man who stood once again in his previous spot, not a hair out of place. Because he breathed. In that entire time, only one person has been born that had a chance of defeating me. There was contempt in his voice, bordering on outright disgust. As if he was genuinely insulted at the mere thought. What chance do you have? Kitsuchi glared, straightening to his full height and seethed at the old man, eyes full of hate. Sarutobi sighed, as if disappointed. I'd hoped this would be interesting, but you are by far a lesser son, of a greater sire. He shifted his stance. The change from defense to offense was subtle, but it was there. Enough games, Hiruzen declared, a tone of finality in his voice. The corpses of the isolated enemy ninja they'd converged on had barely hit the ground before the rest of the enemy was practically on top of them. He could feel them, sense them. Like wolves in the dark, others could too. There were some injured, and by his count, 3 dead, taking their already meager number down to just 15. How many are there? Itachi asked beside him. Her long raven hair was sticky with blood, there was a splash of scarlet across her pale skin. He shook his head. There were too many. Almost 60. He scanned over the remaining ninja, even as he felt the enemies spread out and encircle them. The terrain wasn't in their favor. No choke points, no cover. Tsunade was rapidly healing minor injuries where she could, numbing the pain enough to allow those she couldn't heal to fight. Men were tossing back soldier pills and bandaging the more severe cuts in harried, rapid movements. Sarutobi wasn't here. Naruto was beginning to suspect he was never, in fact, here. That wasn't good. Sarajiji was one of the most powerful shinobi to ever live. If he was here, they had a much better shot against these odds without him, or Itachi needing to reveal their proverbial cards. With him not here though, then, he felt something. Something that made his blood run cold. It was suppressed, hiding, waiting to take them by surprise, but you couldn't hide it. Not from him. He knew a Jinchuriki's chakra. The odds just tipped a little further against them. What's wrong? Itachi's whisper was barely audible over the ring. He replied in kind, not wanting morale plummet. Jinchuriki. She was quiet. Thunder rolled overhead, loud enough for him to feel it in his chest. Stay close, she finally said. If it's smart, it'll target Tsunade. We'll attack when it does. The word struck him then, it. The depersonalization, the dehumanization. Jinchuriki were things, weapons. Had to be. She hadn't meant it that way, he knew. She probably hadn't even realized what she said, but it still made his gut twist horribly. Despite his misgivings, he nodded, knowing what they had to do, watching Tsunade form a rapid set of seals, making the seal on her forehead expand, grow. The dark lines trailing down her face and body like an artist's careful brushstroke was drawing them in real time. Kuchios no Jutsu! He heard the woman speak, and a collection of slugs appeared at her feet, the summoned animals spreading to others, faster than they probably had any right to considering their species. Each one was about the size of an eggplant, glowing with faint green chakra. He knew this technique, he'd seen it before, when pain attacked the village a literal lifetime ago. 2 slugs slithered over to them. He reached down, feeling the cold, oily texture of its underside crawling up his arm as the summoned beast moved to place itself on his upper back, its soothing chakra flooding through his tenketsu. Tsunade was shouting out an order to the Umbu's personal guard, a formation name he didn't recognize, but all of them took up defensive positions around her. Itachi's plan was the right one. He fixed his senses on the chakra signature that stood out like a candle in the distant dark. "I'll signal you," he whispered, "the second it moves to attack her." And then the encirclement was complete. The chakra signatures around them closed in, wolves snarling in the dark, smelling the blood of wounded prey in the air and searching for the kill. Fights had a pacing to them, almost a rhythm. Control the rhythm, and you controlled the fight. It was something that came with experience, a skill of intelligence rather than speed or strength. Once you learned it, it was a hard thing to forget. Hiruzen had never forgotten. The younger Tsuchikage was strong, fast, but he fought still like a young man, looking to outfight his enemy, either overpower them, outwit them, or simply be faster than them. He was all three of these things in this fight. He just didn't realize it. Hiruzen wasn't allowing him to realize it. At his age, his physical body was not what it once was, even with everything he did to stave off the effects of aging. His speed was not what it used to be, especially. His old bones hurt with every block. Arthritis made his fingers ache with deft movements needed to match the ninjutsu the younger man was utilizing. His chakra reserves felt like a bucket of water compared to the ocean he remembered he once had in the prime of his youth, when he took the title God of Shinobi. But Hiruzen showed none of this, because he controlled the rhythm of the fight. It wasn't hard, once he got into young Katsuchi's head. His reputation helped, striking first to put him on the back foot helped even further. Feigning overwhelming strength with a clever trap and a water clone cemented the notion. Even the best shinobi felt fear, especially the best. Once they'd reached a certain level, few could match them on even ground. When it happened, the worry chewed at the back of their mind, the distant, niggling fear that maybe, this time, they would not be strong enough, would whisper across their thoughts as they tried to focus. It wasn't an obvious thing. It wasn't as though the young Tsuchikage's eyes were wide with panic, or like his attacks were off, or becoming sloppy, and neither were his hands shaking. It was nothing so obvious, but it was still there, and it could be exploited. Reading the subtle signs he could see when he was preparing to try and counter, or when he was going to try and gain some distance, or when he tried to weather the storm of Hiruzen's taijutsu like the immovable walls IWA was so famous for. When he defended, Hiruzen would cease his attack. When he moved to strike, Hiruzen would attack first. When he tried to gain some breathing room, some distance, the Hokage would follow. It was a dance, nothing more. And unfortunately for Inoki's offspring, Hiruzen knew all the little steps to this deadly waltz. Trapped in this void, there was nothing to help either of them, no environment to use, no assistance from the world outside, no clever traps that could swing a battle. Just raw skill, and the measure of the enemy. His boredom was a mask, a part of the tactic. Offer nothing. No information. Nothing but contempt. But as the fight wore on, dictated on his terms and his blows landed true on the younger man while his retaliatory strikes were avoided, blocked or absorbed with minimal damage, it became less of a mask and more of a reality. Kick to the knee, step into his guard, elbow to chest, soft, won't feel much pain, make him confident, will counter. He stepped back deftly, avoiding the backhanded blow that would have caught him in the right cheekbone, leaving vital exposed. His hand moved, lightning quick, but the young man realized his mistake, using the other limb to catch his wrist, yanking the arm back to place, protecting the artery. His grip was like an iron vice, strong, unbreakable. Hiruzen's fingers moved, a small, controlled burst of chakra from the very tip punching into the exposed flesh of the hand holding his own. It would not do for anyone to learn he knew the Hyuga Taijutsu. They liked to say the Byakugan was necessary for its use. It was not. Not when you memorized every tenketsu point in the human body. And he had. The jolt of pain and sudden numbness wore off in a second, but it was enough. With the illusion of simply breaking free of the hold with raw, overwhelming strength, he tugged his wrist free, bringing the clenched fist to a ready position at his side once again before releasing it like an arrow from a bow, straight and true, punching right into the Tsuchikage's exposed chest. Chakra surged through his arm, enhancing the strength of an old man to something you'd expect of a much younger creature, smashing his knuckles right into the exact same place his weaker elbow strike had struck, the place he allowed the boy to feel had not been hurt by the previous blow. The blow hit like a cocked hammer, the barely settled nerves firing renewed pain signals, and Hiruzen saw the youth's eyes widen, feeling the wind knocked out of him from a blow that had struck no real weak points but still made him feel as though his lung was about to cave in. The fear grew at the back of his mind, and Hiruzen kept his fist steady, ignoring the aching of his weary bones. "Taijutsu was never my strength," he drawled, voice emerging like rasp as he kept his breathing deliberately slow and even. "You truly are not cut from your father's cloth." Chapter 63. The seal on her forehead was warm, almost hot. Not hot enough to burn, but enough for her to feel the pain of it, of years of stored chakra surge through her body, the energy feeling like a flood rushing to break through the walls of a dam. Her summons helped where they could, empty sieves catching the excess water that flowed out of her, molding it and channeling it to her allies, rejuvenating their bodies and chakra reserves. She stood perfectly still in the middle of the Umbu formation, only partially to aid in her focus, but more so as a ruse. Most would assume her stillness was a requirement of her technique, so they would move in more confident than they should be, more at ease. And that could be all the difference between eliminating an elite shinobi in an instant, or getting into a more prolonged fight. The men around her, Sarutobi Sensei's most elite guard, moved fast, precise, circling her like a living dervish of blades, keeping the enemy shinobi away, able to afford more chakra-intensive jutsu with her own years of reserves refilling their stores. Either using them offensively or defensively, combining fire with wind techniques, or water with lightning. Massive earth walls and crushing pressures of surging rainwater moved around her like the gods themselves were commanding nature to defend her, deflecting kunai and offensive techniques hurled her way. They were fighting, but they weren't winning. If they injured one, or got a kill on another, they would take a wound of their own for their troubles. She would heal it quickly, of course, but that extra bit was more of her finite reserves being burned. Too quickly. Far too quickly. At this rate of attrition, she had another 2 minutes, probably less. Meito Gai, Naruto, Itachi and 2 of the daimyo's guardians fought beyond the encirclement. They were not part of the Hokage's elite guard, they did not know their tactics, formations, strategies, they just hinder them, get in their way, so all of them had chosen to act as a small, independent unit of their own, and she wondered how long they would last in the fight. She could hear their battle, feel the chakra drain on her seal, but she couldn't see them. There were just too many bodies, too many enemies. She knew that before they'd ever come here, knew that whatever force they sent their way was specifically designed to fight her, Orochimaru, Hiruzen and all of Kuto's guard and still ensure victory. And here she was with a third of what they'd expected to face. At best, it was an impossible mission. At worst, it was a suicide mission. She'd known that, she knew it when she volunteered, when she talked over Orochimaru's protest and insistences that he go in her stead. But no. He had his job, and he was by far the more suited for his role than her. If they'd switched places, she couldn't guarantee success doing his task, just as he had no means of keeping their minuscule force of elites alive long enough to turn survival from impossible to the slightly better odds of highly improbable. He hadn't been happy about it. Of all of them, he'd been the one who had bared his teeth and snarled the most in protest, but he knew she was right. For a moment, the briefest of moments, she wondered what would happen with him after. She knew, deep in her heart, that she, Sarutobi and a few others were the reason he kept that kernel of darkness deep in his heart from growing out of control. If she were gone, would he keep being the good person she knew today? Would he go too far? Well, then take care of Akane. She shook her head at the last thought, shunting it to the side, locking it away where it could not touch her. She was safe, and that was all Tsunade could allow herself to think right now. To dwell, to regret was to make sure they would all die. There was a glint of steel through the dark and the rain, something that caught the faint light that illuminated the gloom, rushing right to her forehead. And someone was there, catching it out of the air, deftly returning to his place in the moving battle formation, as if he'd never left. Tsunade had never even caught a glimpse of his Umbu mask. Kitsuchi, Yandame Tsuchikage of Awagakure, was beginning to fully understand that this enemy was beyond him. He was a skilled shinobi, he knew that. Adept, merciless when he needed to be, fast and powerful. But he just did not compare with this. He wasn't sure what monstrosity had birthed Sarutobi Hiruzen, but it truly must have been something descended from Bijou in some way. No matter what he tried, no matter what he did, the old man always seemed to be ready for it, always had a counter on hand. Taijutsu, the one field where someone of his age should have had a decisive disadvantage, was where the old man preferred to meet him, and damn near dominated there too. He couldn't land a single solid blow, and the old bastard would deliver some blows that went from barely hurting to feeling like his bones were being snapped like toothpicks, making it impossible to know which attacks were safe to try and block and which had to be avoided outright. His father's voice cut through the walls of his skull, full of irritation and what he'd once thought to be simple, arrogant pride. No one is worthy of taking this seat from me yet. Was this the monster his father knew they'd have to contend with? Was this the caliber of shinobi from the age of endless war? Rather than pride or arrogance, had it been genuine concern, it must have been. He and Hiruzen had fought in the past, with neither able to kill the other. His father must have known what the god of shinobi was really like in comparison to all his ninja. You are not cut from your father's cloth. The word stung, and every reminder that Hiruzen seemed to send his way with every other word just hammered that point home. He was not what his father had wanted, or needed, as a successor. He was just the best his village had. And their best wasn't enough. He looked to the old man across from him, feeling his heart pounding in his chest, thundering under his ribs, and swore at least one thing. If he could not win, he would at least make certain whomever took the mantle after him would not have to contend with this monster. That, at least, he could do. Blood, he could smell it in the air, almost taste it through his mask. Humans thought themselves to be so superior, but watching them now, as they clawed and tore at each other in an orgy of violence, blood and death in front of him, he could see through that gossamer thin veneer. Beasts. Nothing but beasts. All pretensions of civilization, of society, melted away and showed their real humanity, right here. An animal that excelled at killing its own while thinking itself superior. There was a crackle in his ear. Where are you, Jinchuriki? We're giving you as much of an opening to the Sannin as we can. Take it already. He did not move. Not yet. The humans that called themselves his countrymen needed the will to keep fighting, needed to keep some hope so they would be willing to bleed a little longer. They needed a victory here. He would move. But not yet. A few more could still afford to die before he stepped in. The woman's chakra flowed like waves, like a font of endless, clear waters washing over her allies. He could almost physically see it, the chakra linking her to them like a ghostly, wraith-bound net, her body as the focal point. He wondered for a moment how she had so much available to her. Was she killing herself through this? Some self-deluding notion of sacrifice. Where are you? The voice roared again as a few more died, screaming. His chakra moved through him like an electric current, sending a spasm through his muscles where he hid as he brought out the barest hint of the Bija's chakra, his body losing its corporeal shape, the pack on his back releasing its full collection to assist in the transformation, his bone, sinew and flesh becoming little more than smoke. He saw it when it happened. The ripple through their collective ranks, that instinctive fear as he finally allowed them to acknowledge his presence. Sense it. Beasts always fear a bigger beast. He willed his body into a shape, surging forward like an arrow, straight and true, shooting through the formation of IWA ninja, burning any too slow to get out of his way as he rushed towards his target. The Umbu guard around the woman broke off their attack, falling behind to stand almost directly in front of her, seals already forming for what he recognized as a wind and fire technique. That won't work this time. He willed his chakra to move, projected beyond even this mist-like form. Water and fire. Those were his elements. And it had not stopped raining. His power moved into the waters, controlling it, shaping it through sheer will. The strain of sustaining his transformation and casting this ability without seals would have killed most ninja outright. They would never have the stores needed. He was not most ninja. He was a Jinchuriki. The rain turned from shards of cold into actual shards, almost crystallizing into the shapes he forced them to take, needle-thin points gleaming like razor blades. He curved their trajectory mid-descent, shooting them downwards with all the speed he could force into them. The droplets were rebuffed off of Tsunade, either because the shroud of her healing chakra was enough to disrupt his fine control, turning the shards into little more than drops, or because she was toughening her flesh along with her physical strength. The Umbu beside her were a different story though. Only one of them had enough time to gasp, the other fell like a puppet with his strings cut, both men run through several dozen times by the rain that had suddenly been converted into razor-sharp needles. Even Tsunade couldn't heal through shredded lungs. He saw her eyes shift, the surprise on her face she didn't have a chance to hide as he suddenly expanded his form, the arrow-thin cloud widening, threatening to swallow her whole and burn her alive. Then, someone was in his way. No, not someone. He recognized this boy, His mind flashed for a moment, years ago, the grinding of rapidly spinning chakra tearing through his chest plate. A boy barely out of his diapers, he felt his heart still for a moment, and heard his own words bouncing around in his skull. A beast fears a bigger beast. He tried to shake it off, to quiet the traitorous thoughts as nonsense as the boy's hands moved in an unfamiliar array of seals. And then this boy, this speck of nothing, had to say the one thing that made Han's blood turn to ice in his veins, both palms slamming into the wet earth. Mokutan! Tsunade, unlike most ninja in the field, was fast enough to keep up with what was going on. She had seen Han approaching, realized how he had killed the two men that had tried to defend her seconds after it happened, and was fully prepared to defend herself as the Jinchuriki rushed her in the form of a superheated steam cloud. When Naruto lunged to place himself between her and the enemy, she almost pushed him aside, her fingers brushing the back of his jacket, even as she saw his hands moving through seals. It was only when he moved, slamming his hands down onto the earth, did her brain fully click on how fast he was moving. And then when she heard what he said, and saw what should have been impossible happening right in front of her eyes, she felt herself freeze in shock. In fact, the whole world seemed to grow still in that moment. Only the perpetual hiss of the rain made any noise as all of them, Iwa and Konoha shinobi alike, seemed to stand so still they were afraid to breathe. 5 pillars of wood, curved like giant rib bones, sprouted from the ground around the steam cloud, like the fingers of a hand freezing as they tightened into a fist, glowing a dark green hue, pulsing like a beating heart. And the giant of a man in red armor was suddenly corporeal again, forced back into a physical body with a desperate, shocked gasp of air, as though he just emerged from water after nearly suffocating. Naruto sprang forward, moving before Tsunade's brain could fully start working again, before she could stop him. Han's foot lashed out, lightning fast, catching the Chunin dead in the chest with strength Tsunade knew could rival her own. She felt the bones break, she felt her summon, still latched onto Naruto's back, flood his body with chakra to hastily undo the damage as he was sent soaring towards her. Then someone caught him. Itachi knelt at his side, dark hair and dark clothes almost lost in the gloom of night. "That was careless," she scolded. Naruto coughed out a reply through rapidly healing ribs. "Tried to make our lives easier." He seemed to smile at the young woman. "Get a seal on him quick, you know." The whispers were starting now, not just from their allies, but the enemy too, hushed in shocked awe and thinly veiled horror. However, the name of the Shodame's legendary bloodline word was not the only one on the lips of the hardened, veteran ninja. No, another word was being whispered, carried by the still wind and heard as more and more spoke it. Sharingan. As Itachi stood and offered the blonde a hand in getting to his feet, Tsunade caught it. Just a second. A glimmer of red in the dark of her eye. "This time, don't try to be the hero," the young woman demanded as the last of the damage from Naruto's shattered rib cage healed and he smiled up at her. "But it's what I'm best at. Kill them." She wasn't sure of who shouted it, but the voice was laced with a frantic sort of panic that snapped the enemy force into action, and like a school of fish, the mob turned as one collective whole and swarmed over the two. Abandon formation. She screamed loud as she could, the first sound she'd uttered since the battle began. Defend targets Uzumaki and Uchiha at all costs. They'd already moved before she'd even finished speaking, the entire battle suddenly turning into something of even higher stakes. No single life, not even hers, not even Sarutobi-sensei's if he'd been here, would have been more important than those two. Every last one of them would die if they had to ensure the primordial bloodlines returned to the village. She rushed forward, finally abandoning her stationary position, and the first unfortunate soul to get in her way received a punch that shattered every bone in his chest, the fragments and shards of ribs ripping through his lungs and heart, turning his insides to paste before sending his body hurtling into his friends, bowling them over as she saw Naruto rising up over the crowd, riding a swirling, massive water dragon. With Itachi standing beside him, her red eyes glowing in the dark. The world around the two village leaders was black shadow. Fire techniques fizzled out after moments with no fuel to feed them, water vanished after it hit the ground as though it evaporated, no signs of their fight could be seen, there was nothing he could plant or try to camouflage with debris to lay a trap, nothing that someone as sharp-eyed as Hiruzen wouldn't pick up on. In that same vein, Hiruzen was limited in his options as well. The fight was direct, and as a direct flight it would have a more predictable pattern. He had to use that, had to make Hiruzen do what he wanted once, just once. The wily old bastard was sharp, but he wasn't omniscient. Just one slip, all he needed was one slip. Across from Katsuchi, Hiruzen could read it. On the lines of his face, at the grim look in his eye. The moment where this boy would be most dangerous. A cornered animal, someone resigned to his fate but determined to succeed, where the fear of death no longer had a hold over the shadows of his mind. Now the boy perhaps knew what it truly was to be a Kage. He would have to keep his distance now. His taijutsu had served him well, but only because the boy had been fighting like one who intended to survive. With that changed, his superior physical strength might perhaps be enough to overcome even his extensive repertoire of tricks. As expected, he tried to charge, and the Hokage marched back, leaping away with a single, graceful motion, the boy chasing as Hiruzen formed his seals. A burst of flame from his fingertips, 5 winding serpents swirling through the air in a dizzying pattern, mouths open as they looked to devour their prey. The young Tsuchikage answered, tossing a single kunai straight towards Sarutobi before spitting out a globe of swirling water around his body, bulldozing with brute force through the fiery apparitions, clouds of steam emerging as Hiruzen's other hand thrust forward with a lance of bright lightning, the light cutting through the dark. The lightning hit the water, enough voltage to kill a man a dozen times over. The kunai that had been rushing towards his chest was suddenly replaced by a man, weapon in hand, within striking distance. Hiruzen's own kunai was buried in his forehead with the crack of steel punching through bone. The body burst into a cloud of thick red dirt, the cloud falling over him. Sarutobi felt his eyes widen just a bit in mild surprise before snapping back to the still rushing water orb, the construct surging forward as it lost its consistency, splashing across the dark expanse of the floor between the two men. The Tsuchikage was encased in a stone-like armor. Clever boy. While the water was a conductor to amplify the lightning, the element was a counter to earth only due to the piercing nature of its attacks, all but unstoppable when thrust onto a single point. The water had increased the shock, but eliminated that piercing edge. A double-edged sword to be sure. Even through the seams and cracks of the stone armor, Hiruzen could see the damage, the movements racked with pain, a body urged on by sheer force of will. This was it. The moment the boy had chosen to gamble everything. Move. The thought came, but his body didn't obey, barely stumbling back, and Sarutobi realized the problem immediately. The dirt. It had turned heavy, unnaturally so. The child Kage's chakra clung to it, making every grain feel like a weight in its own right, dragging him down, holding him still long enough for the next attack. Hiruzen's chakra surged, moving through his body like a candle suddenly bursting into a bonfire, purging the foreign chakra lingering over his flesh. Not fast enough, too slow. His eyes found Kitsuchi as the Tsuchikage's hands hit the ground at the edge of the water between them, lightning surging through the ground in crackling forks of energy that split and jumped, rushing straight towards him like a wave. Sarutobi channeled his own chakra, the surge of energy coming down from above like it had before, a wind wall forming around his body similar to Kitsuchi's water orb, the same technique he'd used nearly at the onset of their fight. A mistake, of course. Suddenly, the boy was there, close, too close, ensuring his success as his arm thrust forward into the wall of wind blades. Even through the stone armor the blades sliced the limb to ribbons, great gouts of blood flying everywhere. But it was done. Hiruzen watched as the explosive tag burned, and his own defensive wind wall suddenly engulfed the both of them in a searing fireball. Since the very start of the fight, Hinata had only one goal: keep everyone out of the fight, unless absolutely necessary. She was under no illusions. This Chunin vest did not suddenly give her the ability to keep walking after a slit throat, nor did it give her the power to contest with Anbu-level shinobi. The same thing applied to the rest of them except, perhaps, Lee-san. Stopping all of them before they rushed in to try and help had been an experience she never wanted to repeat. If it wasn't for Sasuke and Niji holding back Lee, Akane, and, surprisingly, Shino, she was sure someone would have rushed in to get themselves killed by now. But she managed, and they all hung back long enough to form something of a plan that was a bit more concrete than hope for the best. Shino's Kikeichu had already flooded the room, surging forward towards the 6 Anbu fighting the 3 Konoha shinobi she didn't recognize, draining the enemy of chakra as fast as they could. Many of the insects had been killed. Fire, lightning, water, in the tight confines of the ship, with no room to maneuver, the Kikeichu were basically fish in a barrel. Shino assured her that some were still alive and feasting on the chakra, but not at a rate that would possibly affect the immediate fight unless it dragged on significantly, which seemed, to her, unlikely. Tenten, by far the best marksman out of all of them, was entrusted with long-range support any time one of the enemy ninja looked like they was ready to take some kind of opening or strike at a blind spot, Tenten's hail of kunai, thrown with pinpoint accuracy, cost them the moment. Herself and Sakura, constantly battering their senses with genjutsu, small and significant, was another factor keeping the three unexpected reinforcements in the fight. Even if the genjutsu were dispelled almost as soon as they were formed, it was a split second of distraction that kept constantly happening. All the while the black orb dominated the center of the room, practically swallowing all the light that came near it, along with any outside force applied to try to break it. As expected, soon enough, the Umbu decided to get rid of them, two of the men breaking off their attack on the Chunin Kunoichi, leaving their allies to fight them in a one-on-one, leaving only the white-haired Jounin at the 2 versus 1 disadvantage, and rushing towards the assorted Chunin and Genin. Niji, Lee, and Kiba were their front line, Sakura, Shino and Hinata right behind them, and Tenten, Akane along with Sasuke, the only one of them with any med-nin training, all the way in the back. She could tell it rankled the Uchiha's pride to be protected, but she would not accept him in the front, and he knew it wasn't the time to argue. The second the two Umbu ninja reached them, Hinata could tell they were in trouble. Kiba, even with Akamaru, was little more than a nuisance, the much more experienced ninja moving so fast that the Inuzuka and his pet looked like they'd been standing still. A flash of the sword and Akamaru was down, another, and Kiba had barely avoided being bisected. A long slice going from his rib cage to his stomach. She wasn't sure if he was going to live. She didn't let herself think on it. Niji had fared little better, while his Byakugan was allowing him to avoid the attacks thrown at him. Probably by reading the Umbu's subtle tells and body language he could land nothing to capitalize on that advantage, and she knew he could not keep that speed up forever. She wanted Lee to pace himself. The longer he went without using the 8 gates, the better their odds, but the enemy hadn't left them much choice. Shino moved forward at her order to help Niji, Sakura to help Lee and give him the moment needed to focus to open the 8 gates. The two assassins moved like living blades, dodging and weaving between blows, even as Tenten desperately tried to provide some kind of support from the back, her weapons moving with unerring precision only to be avoided or deflected at the last possible moment before its target continued their attack as if nothing happened. Shino was the next one to go down. She saw the blade plunge straight into his chest, bursting out of his back with a spurt of blood as her teammate grabbed hold of the Umbu's wrist in a vice grip. The Kikeichu, everything left within his hive, surged out of him to attack the aggressor, a million insects clawing, biting and scratching the man as Shino held him locked in his grip, an opportunity Niji took full advantage of, hands rushing forward faster than she'd ever seen. Her cousin drove the equivalent of chakra stakes into the man's organs and flesh, rupturing a kidney, tearing at his stomach lining and perforating a lung in one solid blow. The man ripped his arm free of Shino's grip, abandoning the sword in her teammate's chest and lashing out with a roar and a brutal backhand punch. She heard a crack. It went off like a firework in the middle of the room, her mind going blank as her cousin's neck twisted too far, seeing the bones of his spinal column splinter, split, and ultimately separate from one another. He hit the ground completely still. Someone screamed, "Tenten." The Umbu stumbled, badly injured, blood seeping out of the lower part of his mask, wheezing his breaths as the air escaped his damaged lungs. There was a surge of chakra from Lee, the gates opening just as the other Umbu managed to deliver a slice across Sakura's collarbone that had been intended for her throat. The pinkette went down, and Hinata saw it before she felt it, behind her, rushing through Tenketsu that suddenly expanded in size, like a beast suddenly snapping open its eye to full wakefulness. Akane. The surge of chakra was different from Lee, sickening, evil. Even looking directly at it with her bloodline made her feel like her eyes were boiling in their sockets, raw heat escaping the cage of the girl's body like an open furnace. "Stop!" Sasuke shouted, too late. The girl rushed forward, practically lunging past Hinata to try and get to Sakura. The pinkette was bleeding badly, trying to use the arm she could still move to literally claw away from the Umbu as Lee and the smallest of their number attacked at the same time. Lee's speed was, as in the Chunin exam, a cut above all of theirs, and Akane herself was not far behind, the surge of chakra through her body showing Hinata exactly how she was manipulating the power within her to increase her strength exponentially. The older shinobi avoided them both, deftly twisting his body out of Lee's attack and swinging his blade towards Tsunade's daughter, forcing her to abandon her attack to defend herself, the blade slicing open her forearms, a river of red flowing out of the wounds before they rapidly sealed up right before her eyes, allowing the girl to attack again, unabated, almost catching the shinobi off guard. As her fist clipped the top of his mask, cracking the crown above his forehead with an audible sound. His partner was still struggling to breathe, his arms shaking as he tried to keep enough strength in them to hold himself up. Hinata turned her head, mouth opening, and breathing out, something that approximated sound enough to catch Sasuke and Tenten's attention. She offered 2 quick signals, and the 2 remaining teammates she had understood her meaning. Medic. Cover. Sasuke rushed forward, towards Sakura, as Hinata moved to try and finish off the downed Umbu, Tenten circling around to flank the man's other side and cover her. Then, the black orb in the center of the room, the one hiding Tsuchi and Hokage, cracked with a thundering rumble. The whole room, the entire ship, shaking with the sound as chakra, raw and visible to the naked eye, bled out of the blackness before the whole thing fell away into black smoke, implacable. If he could use one word to describe what he was seeing, that would be it. There were stories, of course, everyone heard stories, every village had them. Be they heroic or horrifying, there was no living person alive calling himself a shinobi that did not know the names of Hashirama Senju and Uchiha Madara, and the stories they carried. But it was one thing to hear a story in the night, another thing entirely to see it before your very eyes. In the stories, Hashirama and Madara always fought on the same battlefield, with one fighting one half of the enemy, and the other fighting the remaining half, allies, but separate. Their combined might was unstoppable, but they did not fight together. That's not what he saw here. It was not the boy that led the attack, like he'd expected with the Mokutan bloodline, it was the kunoichi. She marched through the throng of enemies, parting them like a knife parts a waterfall. She did not fight the mob, merely walked. Anything that got too close, that's where the boy stepped in. Surges of water, rising earth walls and pillars, mud holes that sank a man up to his shoulders before he knew what was happening, wind blades that severed limbs. It was a whirling, brutal force of nature surrounding the Uchiha girl, a sheer wall of elemental manipulation on a level he'd never seen in a human before. The girl singled men out. The captains, the battle group commanders, the most elite of their jounin. She walked through the mass and press of bodies, the boy creating a ring of death around her to make sure she could move, uncontested, while she searched for the important, key targets. Within the first minute, they'd lost 2 of their 9 medics. Within the second, the commanding officer of the second battle group, and his lieutenant. At the third, another medic, and their censor Nin, all the while any that dared to get close found themselves sliced by wind blades, swallowed by the earth, or crushed by surges of water that could snap bones like a hammer shattering glass. And then the girl looked at him. Finding him through the gloom, through the mass and press of bodies, through the rain and dark, like he was standing right in front of her. Her red eyes gleaming in the dark. Han did not feel fear, not from humans. But those eyes, the eyes of a demon. They sent a very real mortal chill crawling up his spine. The world faded in and out of the blackness. Sounds were muffled, warped in his ears. There was pain everywhere. Every inch of his flesh protesting in agony. There was the cold touch of water against his face, the pitter-patter of rain on his head, hammers falling on his skull. Even the brush of his clothes was enough to send his nerves to firing bolts of agony to his brain. He moved. He was being moved. He felt his stomach roil in protest, and if he had the strength he probably would have thrown up, but even that was impossible. There was a voice, close, shouting. He couldn't understand. He tried to open his eyes to see, but what little he saw as his vision swam was foggy, lacking detail. Splotches of color in the dark. Suddenly, violently, the world was wrenched back into focus, his heart thundering beneath his ribs, pounding away as though it wanted to break free. He sucked down a gasp of air. The pain he'd felt before, magnified 100-fold, enough for him to almost pass out again before he willed himself to stay conscious, to stay awake. His vision came back with agonizing sharpness, someone holding him up, his arms slung over their shoulder. Water surging up, he'd sunk nearly to his ankles. Aikage-sama! Tsutsuki-sama! The Umbu beside him shouted, chakra flowing from the guard's palm into Kitsuchi's chest. Resuscitation? I've stopped the bleeding, but he have to move now, Tsutsuki-sama. Stop the bleeding. Kitsuchi looked down, his mind still in a fog, pain, exhaustion and injury making him slow, but he remembered. He channeled chakra to his feet, feeling razor blades sliding beneath his skin as he forced his legs to support his weight, to stand on the rushing river waters. His eyes found the mangled ruin of his left arm. Wind blades had shredded it, little more remained below the elbow but tattered bits of skin, flesh and bone. A chakra shroud was keeping the blood in his body, but who knew how long that would last? Did he kill him? Did he manage to kill Hiruzen? The guard pulled him, and Kitsuchi's legs stumbled forward in an awkward, weak walk, and his mind fully caught up to the battle still raging behind them aboard the ship, the sickening feeling of vile chakra at his back and the unholy shrieking of birds. He must have gotten him, there was no other option. He must have killed him, or at least hurt him enough so he would never be a threat to IWA again. He must have been capable of at least that. "We're not done yet, boy." The voice made his heart fall into his stomach. He heard the Umbu beside him curse softly under his breath, his head turning sharply, and Kitsuchi followed his gaze. The god of shinobi stood on the river with them. His armor and clothes were in tatters. A horrid burn covered much of his left arm and side, visible between the shredded bits of fabric and metal, but still standing. Still whole. The old man glared at the two of them, the torrential rain matting his beard down into stringy strands. "You came close." The Sandame's voice held the barest hint of praise. Then it was gone. "But you are not the first to come close." His burned arm reached up to the shoulder guard, and with a quick tearing sound, armor and cloth was thrown to the river below, revealing the litany of scars that criss-crossed the body of Hiruzen Sarutobi. "I have lived for over a half-century of endless, unremitting war. Clothes is not nearly enough." For the first time something other than placid boredom entered the old man's tone. An indignant sort of anger. But then the moment passed, and the old man's stoic mask was in place again. Men do not get close to God's boy. Suddenly, there was a sharp pain in his back, a forceful impact that drove the breath from his lungs as the Umbu beside him called out his name. Stabbed, he'd been stabbed. They fall before them. The water rushed up, as the strength abandoned his legs, the chakra holding him aloft dispersing like wisps of smoke. He fell. The currents of the flooded river swallowed his body. Kitsuchi felt cold. Darkness took the edges of his sight before the burning lights of the ship vanished, and he could see no more. Kuratsu, it was the last thought he would ever have.